So, welcome to the Suicide Monk, and my guest today, she's going to introduce herself and give you kind of a little bit of a background, and then we'll get into the discussion. So, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Britton. Thank you. My
Yeah,
name is Karrah. I'm from Indiana, and I think you're having me on here because I've had cancer a few times.
yeah, a few times.
So, yeah, my backstory, I guess, very quickly is I grew up in Indiana, a mile away from where I live now. And I was the oldest of five kids, and my mom homeschooled all of us together. And I had a really unique childhood that I didn't really know was unique at the time. And both my parents kind of found religion very early on in their marriage. And so building a family was really, really important to center it around Christ and Christian principles. And so I think that has a lot to do with why they chose to homeschool us, which definitely had some great benefits and also had some challenges. But I grew up really, really close to my siblings, and family was really important because they were kind of my only friends for a long
Right, right.
time. Um, and so, yeah, so we had a really, really beautiful, intimate, relationship. And when I grew up and went away to college, I moved to California and was there for about a year. And then we had some things kind of hit our family that were really intense. My brother died at the age of 14. And so I moved home to be with my family and to kind of carry the burden of the loss and try to like hold things together as long as I could because I had two younger sisters and I still had a younger brother at home. And so that really helped shape my familiarity with death.
You say
And
you moved back home?
I moved back home for a year.
Where were
Yeah.
you living?
I was living in California. I was going to school in the Valley.
Okay,
hmm
okay. I you said that I probably passed
Yeah,
by that.
that's okay.
Keep going.
Um, and so that was like my first time of really like facing death and having to think about those really hard questions and what happens when a life is taken way too early. And what do you do with that? And how do you process it? And for me, like I was 19 at the time. And I really just remember looking at this thinking, like, this has to matter. This has to matter. And it's not going to matter unless I process it and find a way to cope with it in a really, really healthy way. And so I tried to get involved in youth group and tried to do activities and things with his friends and kids his age and really be there for my family and talk about it and have pictures of him out like we really faced it, head on. But that doesn't really relieve the pain. That just makes you more familiar with it.
Right.
So that was a really big part of my life, but it really helped me understand how short things were and how precious relationships were, and that we only had the present. And so I would really appreciated that and felt like that was a gift that he was able to leave me and the rest of my family as much as we missed him. And so, yeah, and then I went back to school and I met my husband now, Micah, and we eventually moved back to Indiana, where we're at right now. And we spent a few years, trying to figure out and get our footing as a married couple, like in the church. And he played worship music. And I was trying to figure out, where my purpose and where my place was in the church. Because at the time, it's like, that's why we got married. We got married so that we could love Jesus better together, love our community, and serve the church. And so that's kind of where we were at. And a few years into our marriage, I would have been 25, is when I developed acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And so that leukemia is really unique because it's acute, which means it moves really, really, really fast. And so if it goes undiagnosed, you can die within just a matter of weeks because it crowds out your regular blood cells. And so you die slowly, but quickly, if that makes sense. So it happens
Sure.
within a few weeks, but it's like a slow fade. And I was diagnosed with it in a very strange situation. So I was basically really tired and I started like kind of turning yellow, like this jaundice color. And so my dad and my husband Micah pulled me aside. They were like, you need to go to the emergency room. Like, this is not normal. Like, you do not look well." And I'm like, "No, I'm fine." I was working really hard, going a million miles an hour. I didn't really like notice the signs and symptoms of my body, and just was pushing through it. And so, my husband took me to the ER and I was like, "Oh, this is a huge, inconvenience to my weekend." And that ER sent me to another hospital, and they went through several different things. And eventually they landed on like liver failure. They were like, you are in terrible shape. You're in liver failure. You're probably going to need a transplant. We're going to transfer you to another hospital. Well, I sat in that hospital for a few days and I was progressively getting worse and I wasn't able to get out of bed. And I was like almost like delusional. And they were like, well, yeah, we have to give you a liver transplant, but we can't figure out what's wrong with you. And we can't give you a transplant until we diagnose. And so eventually they said, hey, we're just going to review your results with hematology and oncology because it's the only stone that we haven't looked under. But we'll let you know. And within like 20 or 30 minutes, there were like, I don't know, 7 or 8 doctors in my room looking at me saying like, hey, you have acute leukemia. We have to start chemotherapy as soon as possible. We're transferring all of your stuff up to the cancer care center, and you need to make arrangements. And I was like, what do you mean I need to make arrangements? They're like, we don't really know like if you're going to be able to get through this. Like we found it really, really late and we're going to throw as much as we can like at you, but it like we don't know. So that was really scary. And that was the first time I had cancer. And I ended up in the ICU and it was really, really scary. And when I finally got home, like several weeks later, basically they told me like the rest of my year looked like me going through a lot of chemotherapy to try to get into a remission. And that type of chemotherapy is really unique because it's so intense that you can't go just to like an outpatient clinic, sit in a chair, receive a few hours of chemotherapy and go home. I had to be kept overnight because it dropped my counts so low that they basically like bring you to the point of death. And then they're like, okay, let's fill you up with platelets and red blood cells and like try to stay home and don't go anywhere and replenish yourself. And then once you're good at the end of the month, let's do this all over again. And so they did that for about like between 7 and 9 months. And then at that point, I like made a pretty decent recovery. And I was like, wow, I learned how strong I was. I learned what such an amazing community of people like I have in my church and in my family. And so many people showed up, strangers, people I had never seen before to, help clean my house or, help pay for my medical bills. Or, I mean, I've just never felt so seen and so loved. And it was really, really hard. And I had some really deep moments with my friends and family, like talking about death because I had such poor statistics. I think it was like, about at the time with what they had, it was like anywhere between 25 and 30% chance of like survival. And so I had to really come to terms with facing, death.
What you had to face that really early on. So
Yeah.
how did that weight play into your going forward? Because you're not given a lot of opportunity to make decisions for yourself
Right.
when your walls crumble that quickly.
Right.
It's like we're doing everything we're told to do at this point.
Hmm.
How do you stop and say, is this for me? How, like,
Right. Yeah. Well, I think you're so taken back by the reality of the situation that you're like, well, I don't really have a choice. And so the only way is forward. And even though it sounded like something terrible to go through, you find a way to like dig deep and you find that you like have the strength because it's like, it's this or bust.
right, that's life or
And,
death.
and yeah, it's life or death.
But is that quality of life good in
Right. So
that?
for me, like it was back and forth. It was like a yo-yo. It was like I'd be like bawling my eyes out in pain, not being able to move. Like there was a lot of suffering. But then there would be like a few weeks of reprieve, and then there would be suffering. So it was like, okay, I knew the game. It was like, okay, go through something really bad, get a few weeks of, semi decent, where I'm not in pain constantly. And so it was just kind of like, well, if I get through this year, hopefully I can achieve a remission and then eventually work on building back. So it was really the hope that kind of is the life raft that keeps you floating.
Okay. So there was hope in the fact that what they're telling you is like, you got a low percentage, but we're going to throw it at you and see what happens. It's like a shot in the dark, but
Yeah.
somewhere in there it created I mean, you have this beautiful family that I'm acquainted with, and then you have this husband, and so were you able to, did you guys want to have children at that time?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
And the chemotherapy like lowers your chance of having children, like the type that I received. And so it was
Okay.
like, oh, this might not be an option for us the first time I had cancer, but it was like, you might be able to, but it might, it might lower. It changed a lot for me, physically, of course, emotionally. Um, but we, there's so much adrenaline in wanting to survive that you just find the strength and I guess almost the excitement like keeps you going. Like you don't really deal with any trauma because you don't have time for it. So your only thought is like getting to the
Yeah.
next point. And
Right.
so there's a lot of adrenaline in that. And, there were so many intimate moments with people where it was like, I was able to tell them how much I loved them or how much they meant to me, or there wasn't any agenda when we hung out because it was like, well, you might not be here. So just being in your presence is enough, like just soaking in someone's presence. And I learned so much about how much I had like neglected that time. It was always like, oh, if we get together, we have to do this, or we have to go here. Or, it was like, people were just enough. Those moments were enough. It was like I experienced this really interesting space in between that allowed so much clarity of what mattered. And I didn't have to try to get that clarity. It was just there because we didn't know. So there's this weird, sweet space of the unknowing that allows you to understand what is really important to you. Because, I didn't have to think about retirement. I didn't think I have to, I didn't need to think about earning money. Like I didn't need to think about being productive. It was like my
Right.
only job was to stay alive and the moments that I had to just really absorb the most out of them.
That's a beautiful statement, and I experienced this even in my walk. Walking towards my own death. It's like everything becomes more beautiful. Everybody becomes more beautiful. You appreciate everybody more. You appreciate those hard moments, those difficult moments, but also those beautiful moments because they solidify a relationship that you've worked towards. And um, everything does become more beautiful. Everything becomes more hard, also
Mhm.
very, very difficult because and then you're like, I'm gonna miss that. I'm gonna miss that smell. I'm gonna miss that moment. I'm gonna miss that person. I'm gonna miss that thing that means something to me. And it just everything becomes, it's almost, you enter into a euphoric state of beauty and hardship.
Yeah, it's like the deep, deep sense of gratitude that doesn't go away, where just
Right.
anything is like amazing and beautiful. And then you ask yourself the hard question of, well, why now? Why not earlier? Like, why do I have to be facing like death, even though we're facing death every single day, right? Like, you're a day closer to it
Yeah.
today than you were yesterday. And
Yeah.
so it's everybody else listening to this, but we don't talk about it. And so we don't think that way. But yeah,
Yeah.
it
We
really
we
allows you
really
to live
don't.
in the face of the present.
Yeah. And that's the. Uh, do you still live in that moment, that
So
present?
one of the yes and no. So it's interesting because so I got better that after that first diagnosis, and I had about like 6 months or so of remission, and I started doing extreme sports, and my husband and I like really entered like the YOLO. Like we were like, oh, instead of just having Christmas, like let's go to the Smoky Mountains and hang out in a tent and have Christmas in the middle of the woods. Like our minds were blown in terms of like that there were no rules we had to live by anymore. Like we could kind of just do the things that we always like wanted to do. And it opened this ability to be really creative with life and to see things really creatively after my first diagnosis. And so we had a lot of fun with just friends and family doing things, having unique conversations, like just really living life in the moment in the way we wanted to. And I'm so sorry, I lost my train of thought. Chemo brain is a real, super real thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
And
okay.
but I feel like you asked me a question and I was going somewhere with it and I dropped it.
We were talking about the
Oh,
relishing in that.
present.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fast forward to now, and I've had cancer 2 more times, and things have radically changed from that point. And I would say yes. However, what happens when your present is full of suffering and pain?
Right. Yeah, I
So
was going to get
then,
there.
right? So
Yeah.
then, how do you sit in that space when it isn't like all these wonderful moments and you want to escape that? And I think what was really scary to me, if I can be really honest and really vulnerable with you, is after I went through that first diagnosis and I got through those first 9 months of survival, and I started to think, oh, maybe I'll make it out, right? They don't consider you cured until you're in remission for 5 years. So I had 6 months after that first year where I was like, oh, maybe I'm one of those like 25% that gets to walk out. Like maybe
Right.
I am, because I never have been a worrier, because I kind of had the philosophy like there is no problem until there is a problem. So I was scared, of course, but I was like, okay, I shouldn't be scared until it comes back. Okay. I'm not going to let it take that anxiety take away from my present moment. There were moments after I finished chemo where we started to get back into normal life and we started to get back into a routine. And I started to go back to work and have to think about all the normal things that people think, like retirement. Am I earning enough money? Am I spending my time the right way? The future things. And I remember thinking, I miss cancer. I miss being sick. I miss being in the hospital, because there was such an acute sense of clarity and permission. There's a permission when you're dying to only focus on what matters. And
Right.
there's such a deep, like, preciousness and enjoyment for it. That's like when I stepped outside of that world, I felt like I didn't have the same like permission. I felt like those things that mattered so much started to like, it was like a slow fade. And I was like, why, why is this clarity starting to move out of focus as I get further and further away from death? Like, it's like I was like trying everything I could do, journaling, like being in quiet spaces, being like, okay, focus on what matters, focus on what matters, focus on enjoying the moment like you did when you thought you were dying. And it's like, I couldn't get back to that perfect spot. And so then I found myself like missing those really tender, intimate moments of when I was dying. And I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, why would
Was
anybody want to go back to that extreme
was
pain?
that from the outside people also? Like, well, she's doing better, so we're all back to our regular lives, and those
There
special
could have been a
moments are
little bit of that. That's a great point. I mean, sure. I mean, you can't live in that space forever, you know?
right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it could have been that. And it was weird because I've even had that conversation with my sister and I've been like, do you ever like remember those moments and like look back on them and like miss them? And she's like, yeah. And I can't really explain why. Like there was something, and you know what? There's something really beautiful about thinking that you're going to die and being
Yeah.
surrounded by the people that you're with and seeing them. It's like they're this exchange that you're having, this time that you have with them is like so magical and so precious. Like it matters so much.
Yeah.
And I just kept thinking, why couldn't it matter this much outside of this space to me?
Because we're entering into life again. Um, I think if your mentality is that you're always walking towards death, and I don't mean that you in general, but in every in every person, if we were to think, okay, today's my last day. If we thought today was our last day, we would enter into it with a vigor and relish that day and relish our moments and relish our people. But now you're back into this mentality of, well, I got to plan for my future.
Right. I'm
And
not, and it's weird because when you think you're dying, you're not living each day just to get to the next day. It's like, oh, this
right,
day is it. I'm in it to win it. I am right here. I don't know if tomorrow's going to come. I don't really care if it does because I'm right here. And there's that, you're not looking at what's next. You're looking
right,
at right here.
yeah,
But yeah, I think that, that perspective really helps. But so when my cancer came back a second time, it was really scary because of course, no, I didn't really want it to come back. So I wasn't like, oh yay, like
right,
everything is better. I was like, oh shit. Because the statistics are really poor for a second recurrence. Very, very poor. And they had to get me into another remission, which if they were to have used chemotherapy, I had a 5% chance of getting into a second remission. So they
Oh,
had
wow.
just had a brand new medication, a brand new drug come out. And they were like, hey, this is our like Hail Mary, let's see what happens. And I was able to achieve remission within a few weeks now, or within a few months, pardon me. That remission, they say each time it comes back faster. So they were like, it's likely going to come back and we're not going to be able to get another remission. So you need to make the choice if you want to get a bone marrow transplant. And that was really, really scary to me because it's not a small thing. Like it takes, on average, an entire year to recover. You go through so much chemotherapy that they kill all of your bone marrow and all of your immune system, and then allow somebody else's to develop in you, hoping that it will notice the cancer and kill it when it comes back.
Uh-huh.
So it's not even like, oh, it's going to prevent the cancer from coming. It's like, oh no, if when it comes, hopefully this immune system will, eat those cancer cells or destroy them, and you won't have the issue. So that was really terrifying to me, and I needed to find a donor. And my sister, Michaela, was like a perfect match. So that was amazing. The downside of this was it would totally destroy my body's ability to produce eggs and estrogen and all those great things. So I would basically go into menopause, the day after I received this amount of chemotherapy.
Oh, wow.
And yeah,
And how
so
old
that
are you?
I was 31.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and it's funny because you don't really think about it because you're just so focused on survival that it's like you don't even deal with that. You're like, well, I don't, okay, if I'm dead, I can't have kids either. So,
Right. Right.
what's the point? But that was hard because growing up in a really large family, that's kind of like what I was groomed for and what I thought my life was going to look like.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
but I kind of like countered that as like, okay, we'll deal with that later. And, the transplant was really hard. It was really hard on my family. It was right in the middle of COVID and, right before the vaccine came out. And, you already have to be super cautious as a transplant patient. And then in the midst of a pandemic, it was like even worse. So I could only have one person at a time in the hospital. I spent an entire month in the hospital after I got my chemotherapy, just kind of like recovering because I had to get a lot of blood transfusions, a lot of platelets. I mean, you literally you can hardly move. I mean, it's pretty bad.
Wow.
And then I moved to a place just 10 minutes outside of Indy because you go for appointments like every other day to get your blood drawn, and they have to
Yeah.
make sure all your organs are functioning and things like that. So we spent a couple months in isolation, and that was really, really hard to not see, a lot of my family and friends during that time. But I made an amazing recovery. And my doctors were like, wow, we've never seen somebody make such a quick recovery. So, I got the transplant in April. And by like August, September, I was like running again, which was crazy. And I was like lifting again. I was like cooking, and I felt so much better. And I was like, wow, I made another recovery. Like, this is great. Like, I really know what matters now. Like, I'm really focused. I decided to go back to school in the middle of all of this online and get my master's in health administration because I'm like, I'm going to switch careers. Like, I don't want to be drinking wine with the top 2%, like, helping people, find fancy bottles for their cellars and things like that. What matters is, this space. I didn't want to be in cancer, but I'm been forced into it. And so maybe I'm supposed to be in this space to make a difference in people's lives. And so, I started that. And just a few weeks later, my cancer came back out of nowhere.
During
And
school.
yeah, like I had
Yeah.
just got accepted into the master's program online, thinking I'm going to go back to work in a couple months. And then my cancer came back. And that was devastating because one, not that much time had occurred in between my second relapse in my third, which is really
Okay.
dangerous
Yeah.
because it comes back quicker each time. And so if it only came back in, like 4 months, then what was that going to look like a third time? And so, my doctor had to have a really serious conversation with me. And she was like, we don't know if we can get you into a third remission because a lot of these drugs don't work a second time. And we don't really know anybody that has this cancer that's living with it 3 times. Like, this is
Wow.
kind of the end of the road for you.
Kind of a
Um,
rarity.
yeah.
Yeah.
And, I really appreciated her. She's one of the most caring, amazing individuals you'll ever meet. I mean, she's hella smart, but she's also so caring. And we had a really, really honest relationship. Like, she wasn't going to hide the facts from me. And I think a lot of people, when they're in this situation, they don't really want to know what they're up against. And I
Right.
wanted to know every
Yeah.
statistic. I wanted to know how long it would be. I was like, I'm going to face this head on. Like, I want to know what I'm dealing with. Like, what's my chance of living? And it was like under 10%. And, then we were like, okay, well, let's go to Texas and Seattle. And we went to a lot of other experts and they said the same thing. And, I had to make a choice about getting a second transplant. And with that comes like, well, what is your quality of life? How do we think this is really going to play out? You're only a few months after transplant to turn back around and do this all over again to a body. There's like so much risk. Like, it was the
Yeah.
same amount of risk if I got a transplant living with a second transplant in that amount of time as if I were to do nothing. And so we
Mm.
felt like, well, that's the other thing is how do you make hard decisions? Right? When your life is involved. Like,
Right.
I was like at Borders, I'm like, okay, I'm going to find books on making decisions. Like, I'm going to read about people who gamble. I'm going to read about, finance managers. How do these people make these major decisions, in their life? And it really forced me to come to terms with the fact that I was the only one who could make this decision. And nobody else could make it for me.
Mm.
And there was no right decision. There was no wrong decision. There was just a decision.
Right.
And that was really, really hard for me. And I had to look really deep inside myself and really access my intuition and really try to decide what I wanted and make that decision and stand by it. Because I'm like, well, if it comes back, I'm going to be like, well, what if I would have gotten the transplant? Like, if I get the transplant and I suffer a terrible quality of life and I go into organ failure and die, then I'm going to feel like, well, why didn't I just wait? Like, there was really no doctor was going to tell me what to do. I just wanted them to tell
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
And so, so it really forced me to have to make that decision. That was the hardest decision I've ever made in my life. But we decided not to get a second transplant. And
Oh,
here I
wow.
am.
And how long has that been?
That's been almost 2 years. And they gave me
Since
6 months. So,
wow.
yeah.
Wow. So you are in remission, and this, I
I
mean,
am in remission.
other
They
than the after effects of
Yeah.
the
Now my quality of
chemo, and
life, yeah.
yeah, that's
Right after I got a third remission, they is when my graft versus host disease started. And that's a disease where your new immune system attacks your current immune system. And that transplant started attacking me. And it's been attacking me ever since. And so I have a lot of acute and chronic symptoms. I've had like at least 6 surgeries since that point. Like, I go down to Indy every single week. I see multiple specialists. I go to Cleveland also. I'm like a full-time patient.
yeah. I understand that. I've not gone through it as long as you have, but I have been a full-time patient for short stints of time.
Right.
It is not fun. It sucks. It sucks bad.
Yeah.
There's actually no words for it. It's
No.
every time you think about going to the doctor, for me, it just created anger. I was
Yeah.
so frustrated and so tired and having to sit there for so many hours and
So much fatigue,
wait. Oh, it's
like
terrible.
mental and physical.
Yeah, it's
It takes a
terrible.
little bit of your personhood away each time, and you
Yeah,
feel more and more like a robot or like a piece of cattle.
yeah. You're getting poked and prodded all the time to try to figure out what the problem is.
Right.
And it's like, or how to fix the problem, or how to move forward. And it's a nightmare. It's just a
Yeah.
constant nightmare. I mean, I've done it long term over 30 years with diabetes, and that's caused a lot of problems, but definitely not in the realm of what you've suffered
But your
physically.
pain, like, your pain is your maximum amount of pain for you. And is just as intense and painful and hard to live with it as mine is, because I can compare my situation to other people who have like lost their legs or limbs in transplant, or they're in a wheelchair. And I mean, I had to go through a lot of physical therapy, but I'm not in a wheelchair. And
Right.
like I could point to that and say, well, like, be grateful, Karrah, that's not you, you know, but that doesn't mean, that doesn't take away from the pain that I'm experiencing
Exactly.
by
And that's
comparing somebody else's.
right. And that's kind of the point of this podcast is it, yeah, every voice matters. Every story matters. Just because it's not as bad as mine or as bad as somebody else's, it does not mean you don't have a voice. It doesn't mean that you don't have something to say. It doesn't mean that you can't feed somebody else's life with the even the minimal trauma that you may have experienced in your life
Yeah, and it's
or
not minimal to you. Like
right,
that's the thing.
exactly.
It's a big deal. And then we compare our stories, and then we try to talk ourselves out of it. Well, like,
Yeah.
see, it wasn't really a big deal that your parents yelled at you when you were 5. Like they weren't beating you. So, you know, we have these internal dialogues in our head. And for some reason, it's so hard for us to allow these situations to just be as they are, which is painful, and to sit with that pain. Because maybe
Yeah.
if we sit with it for a second, we can then metabolize it. But
Right.
if we don't allow ourselves that space to sit with it, we never get to transform it or do anything with it, because we're in a constant state of denial. But we're so afraid to sit there. It's like, well, of course you can't move past it or do anything with it, because you have to hold it first. Like you have to see what you
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. And I think like I've held my trauma, rage, anger, whatever. I've held it poorly over my life. I think there's the like now I'm holding it, and I was talking to my an interview I just did. She knows me fairly well, and she's like, maybe your rage is turning like all this sadness that you feel because I can't control like I'll start talking about something and I'll just start bawling. Especially if it's like my family or grandkids or kids, and you know the trauma I've created, or even something that's happened to me, it's just uncontrollable. It just happens. But what she thinks is my rage is actually morphing into that sadness. Like I don't like that rage, so I'm not putting it out there in a way that I used to. I hold that very very differently than I used to. And it does make sense. It's like all this stuff is now kind of morphed into this sad state, which I would call low grade depression. Like I
Mm-hmm.
have all the time low grade depression, and I'm okay with that because it's manageable.
Mm-hmm.
Like all that depression and all that trauma, all that stuff is just manageable now. And I can get out of bed and I can move and I can do work and I can think through it, even though I'm still have this thought process. Uh, this underlying thought process is still happening. I'm now able to function on a 75% level, which I've never been able to do. You know, that 75% was always depression and anger and rage, and it controlled everything. And that 25% was, well, I felt a little happy today, I felt a little joy today, I felt a little this today. And now it's like, no, I'm pretty much even keeled and level and happy and joyful, and but I still have this low grade depression. I've still done the things that I've done to get me where I'm at. That doesn't change the story. It just means that I'm okay with who I am today,
That is
which is
so,
weird. Yeah.
no, but you know, there's this pressure and this idea of like what happiness should be like, or when someone asks you how you are, how you should be. And it's okay that we're not okay sometimes. It's okay to have sadness. It's okay to have anger. It's okay to have depression, just like
Yes.
it's okay to have joy and excitement. And it's like none of those feelings last forever. The good
Right.
ones last forever. The bad ones don't last forever. And I think one of the things that I've really learned, that my therapist shared with me is she was like, you know, you tend to categorize your emotions as like, oh, this is a good one or this is a bad one. And she's like, what if you started approaching them without any judgment? And I was like, well, no, of course it's bad to be depressed. It's bad to be angry. It's bad to be sad. She's like, but what if it wasn't? Like,
I
says
don't
who?
think it is. I don't
Right.
think
And it's
it's
like,
bad.
these are just feelings. They're
Yeah.
not good or bad. And causing us to categorize them causes this avoidance. And the body does something with those emotions, right? Like it
Yeah.
stores. And
Yep.
feel like what I'm hearing you saying is like being able to face them for what they were and allow them their own space, like allow them their time to dissipate and come back around full circle, and allowed you to also feel joy and happiness. And it's like, I think what happens, and I could be wrong, but the way that I've been thinking about it lately is if I allow myself to process through, metabolize through the anger, the depression, the sadness, then I also get that same opportunity to process through the joy, the love, the excitement, the gratitude. But if I avoid the metabolization, right, of the anger and depression, well, that creates a little bit of numbness for the joy,
Yeah.
excitement, and love, right? Like we
Yep.
can't choose really forever what to feel and not feel. We can have moments of compartmentalization, right? You might feel an extreme wave of sadness and be in a situation where you're like, now's not the time for me to have a breakdown, and you might be like, let's compartmentalize this for right now. But then you're going to need to go and process it later, right?
Right.
And probably
Yep.
sooner rather than later.
Yep. Yeah, I've been sitting with I it's difficult for me because I have to remind myself I've been sitting in sadness. Well, it's been a very difficult year this year. And I haven't had a lot of peace
Mm-hmm.
with in it's just been constant, like nonstop, never a moment of rest to it's almost like when you first diagnosed, you're just bombarded constantly with other people clouding your mind and your judgment and your focus and all that stuff, and then you have trauma on top of that, like, well, now I'm diagnosed with this cancer that I was going to go party this weekend, and now I'm going to die. um I just and I've one of the things I've entered into is like exactly what you're saying. I'm okay that I'm sad. It's okay that I'm sad. Actually, me being sad right now may be a key to helping somebody else. Because as I enter into my sadness and embrace that and work through it and stop judging myself because I am angry, sad, depressed, traumatized, whatever. As soon as I stop and just accept that, I'm able to, well, it dissipates rage. And I'm okay with, I'd rather cry than be angry.
Mm-hmm.
But you were going to say something.
Well, one, I think it's okay to be angry too. I mean, anger is such a great indicator. It's like a thread that if we pull is going to take us somewhere inside of our bodies or inside of our minds, and it's going to expose it to something that we probably need to bring attention to. Like anger inside our body is like a child screaming, like, see me, notice me, like, pay attention to this. And so I feel like sometimes it's okay to pull that thread and see that for what it is. And I think too with sadness, like, you know, I like being sad.
I
There's
do
like
too.
joy and sadness really really sit next to each other. I
Yeah,
feel
I
like
think you're right. Yeah.
sometimes I'm like, am I experiencing an extreme euphoric feeling of happiness, or am I really sad right now? Like I can't tell, and I don't need to decide. I'm just going to allow that wave to move through my body and feel whatever this moment is, because I am what it's causing is me to be present. It's causing me to be here right now, right? And you're experiencing that really intense state of mindfulness of being there. And you said something about maybe this sadness is helping me help others and process. And there was something introduced to me like several months ago when my like pain and depression and things were like really becoming like really too intense to hold. And so I was reaching out for like anything, because I mean, I was definitely like suicidal. Like there were times I would wake up and I would be like, I don't want to be here. Like I wish I wouldn't have woken up. Like I wish I had the courage to like drive my car into a tree. But then all I could think of was like failed suicide attempts are very expensive.
Yeah. And there's a lot of
And
them.
right. And then I feel so guilty because I'm like, I worked so hard to get here, and so many people did not have the privilege. How am I, how did I get here of this lack of, gratitude? And what it was like, I had to process through a lot of physical pain and a lot of emotional pain that kind of got left to the wayside when you're in the adrenaline of just getting through it. So one of the things that I came across were some books by Poema Chodron, who's a Buddhist monk, and she wrote The Places That Scare You and then When Things Fall Apart. And both of those books introduce the concept of Tonglen. Have you heard of that?
Uh-uh.
So it's this idea that your
Tonglen?
Tonglen, yeah, it's like a Buddhist kind of principle. I'm still
Okay.
learning about it, so I hope that for anybody who's listening that knows about it, they um, I hope I'm explaining it correctly. But the idea is that you experience like this pain and suffering, and this pain and suffering that you're experiencing, you can kind of channel or use to bring more love and empathy, not only into yourself, but into the world. And so the idea is that when you're experiencing this or you see that, you breathe in the pain and you breathe in the suffering of everybody else. Like, so for me, it's like I was experiencing a lot of this pain and suffering, and I thought about other people, other relationships, not just in cancer, but other people who didn't want to be here, thinking about them and breathing all of that pain in and then releasing out love and compassion. And you can do this one-on-one with someone specifically who's struggling with it, or you can do it with yourself. But it was like, it's a meditative, like prayerful principle of kind of rechanneling or utilizing that. And they really believe that it does go out into the world and brings healing to others, you know? And how is that really any different than a prayer, right? When we're like,
Exactly. Yeah.
we're going to pray for these kids in Africa, or we're going to pray for this or that.
Yeah.
It's like, except this is like to me a more deeply connected way of praying, because you're asking to take in and take on that suffering, right? So I'm already experiencing
Yes.
it, or I'm not, and I'm asking for more of it, to take that in, and then I'm releasing it back out, but releasing it, transforming it. I'm metabolizing that pain within my body as love and compassion, and then I'm sending it back out. And for me, that was a really powerful practice in certain moments where it was too much for me, that I was like, okay, I'm going to take in more. We're going to metabolize this as something really, really good and send it back out. And so, you know, I don't know if that's helpful, but
No, it is actually. That's kind of how I'm.
you're
So I've
doing it
always,
without even knowing.
yeah, it is actually manifesting in a way that is not intentional for me. It's actually the shift in who I'm becoming. So I've
Wow.
always related it to. I'm kind of like, have you ever seen The Green Mile? With
Ah,
It was written by Stephen King. It's about the
no.
prison.
Mm-mm.
So there's the metaphor that I would use here is the one prisoner that was incarcerated, big black man. I think it was based on a true story back in the 30s to 50s, somewhere in there, maybe 20s, something like that. But he gets incarcerated basically for something he didn't do. Well, he was found holding two twin girls that were murdered. Basically, the premise of who he is he absorbs people's disease or pain or suffering, and it makes him sick for a time. And then he releases it, and it comes out out of his, in the depiction of the movie, it comes out as this black cloud of like flies and bugs or whatever. Like the disease, he absorbs it and then releases it because he has that ability to do that. And that's how I've always kind of envisioned myself. Like I feel the world, I feel the suffering and the pain, and not as much of the joy, but I do see so much of the suffering in the world. I don't have to watch the news. I don't have to read the newspaper. I know exactly what's going on. Like I'm in tune with and I think a lot of people are, we just ignore it. Like I'm not
Yeah.
special. I don't think I'm special. I think I've come from a place of suffering. So it's easy for me to identify suffering, if that makes sense. It's easy for me to pick up on the micro vibrations of somebody else's suffering and enter into that. But
Wow.
I'm kind of doing exactly that. Is like I can't get away from my suffering, so why not embrace my suffering and then take my suffering and put it out in the world that makes something good. And I didn't do that till I started walking towards my death. Now, have I done that periodically in my life and made things better? Yeah, sure. But am I doing it intentionally right now? Yes, absolutely. We go back to that. Everything's more beautiful. Everything's more hard. But who do you want to be at the end of your days? What
Right.
do you want to be?
I think that's amazing. I mean, I feel like what I'm hearing you saying is that instead of running away from your suffering, you finally decided to confront it and
Yeah,
to experience it fully for what it is. And that is, I mean, I just, that is so powerful and that is so incredible. And I think we need to hear that because it's not going to go away. I knew that I had a long road of suffering ahead of me as a child. Like as a
mm,
young 5 or 6 year old child, I contemplated my my reason for life and I knew that things were going to be hard. Now, I don't know if that's because I was like hit with all this biblical, all these biblical principles and like these stories of, hell and heaven and,
right.
I'm sure that played into it. But I mean, those were things that really, really plagued me. And so, but I didn't know that it would manifest itself this way. I had no idea. And I think running from suffering induces more pain
Sure.
than
Yeah.
facing it, truly.
Yep.
And I think, that anxiety or that tension that we create with avoiding it truly does make it worse because when you sit there and you stare at it and you sit with it and you feel those emotions associated with it, there is so much strength and power that you have to muster as a result that you didn't know were there to begin with. And so, if you aren't to be approached with these challenges, how will you ever know what is deeply inside of you? And I recently read a quote in a book about obstacles, and he was basically saying, like, oh, I pity the man that never has a challenge because they don't really get to understand their true potential. And so it's like, I'm not trying to be insensitive to other people's suffering. God knows I'm not because I feel like I experienced a lot on a daily basis.
Yeah, you do.
But how do we metabolize that suffering and what do we do with it? Is really the bigger question. And there are moments that I have and I'm like, wow, I'm able to find a deeper part of myself because I have to face these. I'm forced to. And this is also so beautiful because then I get to connect with people in a deeper, more intimate way. The conversations I have on almost a daily basis are really intense with people because I
Right.
just kind of feel like I don't have time for bullshit. I don't want to bullshit.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so the people that really can't handle the conversations, that's fine. We can dance around and talk about servicey issues and I can do that, but I'm only going to do it for so long.
Right. Right.
Because I just feel like it's just not worth it. But I just love what you had to say about facing that suffering, and I wonder if more people were to truly trust themselves and know that they had that strength within them, like maybe that would help other people like that consider suicide. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a big part of this, well, at least for me, and um, anyway, is being able to speak out my struggles. So I'm like a pressure cooker. The more, and I feel it all the time. So it's always in motion like that. That darkness that haunts me is always chasing me down in some form or fashion. Now, I have learned how to manage that chase, and I'm in control of the pace now, but it never stops. Um, it's always trying to get out of that cage and bring me back down to the bottom. Um, I have no idea where I was going with that. I forgot.
Well,
Sorry
we were
about that.
about no, I had asked you a question about like would that help other people that are
Okay.
facing like thoughts of suicide, like knowing that
Yeah.
that strength exists somewhere and how to access that.
I don't, I think this is the beginning stage, at least it is for me, and that's speaking it out. And then even in my interviews, it's like, well, like when I did, my husband didn't want people to know. So there was no voice. And it's like, so now his burden has become her burden. And now she's not allowed to talk about the burden that she feels because it's his burden. It's so messed up. It's like the stigma surrounding the shame of feeling like you want to die, take your own life, has been so detrimental. I think it's increased the opportunity for people to take their own life because Christianity really speaks against it. Catholicism speaks against it. Muslims speak against it. Like there's very few. The Buddhists, they don't agree with. Well, I was reading a little bit about that, but it's case by case on suicide in Buddhism. But like nobody, the Japanese agree with it. They've practiced it for thousands of
That
years.
suicide forest, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That was actually one of my destinations. The Sea of
Wow.
Trees. Yeah. My first planning of taking my life was my destination, and I was all set and ready to go, and I got spiritually pulled back into life somehow.
I'm glad you.
Um, yeah, well, it's brought me to this point because I've planned it 3 times, so and,
Well, so let's go back to that in the transparency idea. I think it's so important to talk about it,
mhm,
to talk about the uncomfortable things, to talk about the things that we feel like we shouldn't feel, and that we really need to stop shaming ourselves, for those
yeah,
feelings and shaming other people.
right,
And really, like, our question should be, why are you hurting? Or tell me about that hurt.
yes,
Instead of, whoa, that's too much. You're gonna go to hell. Like, don't even think about it. Like, don't even go there. And it's like,
yeah,
well, I am. And so now what would you like to do with this? Like, I remember coming over to my parents' house for one of my birthday dinners, I think, or there was some special occasion going on, and my dad was like, how are you doing? And I just like slammed my head down on the table and I was like, I just want to kill myself. And he was like, uh what? And my mom like kind of got really uncomfortable and she didn't really know how to handle it. My dad was like, took like a couple deep breaths and then he like just came next to me and put his hands on me. He's like, this is terrible. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you feel this way.
yeah,
No, thank you. Thank you for not like going into
yeah.
some like sermon or preaching something about like how we all need you here. Why would you feel that way? I feel like that's the worst thing to hear. Why would you feel that way? Okay, so now I have to feel like I'm a bad person for the thoughts that I have
Yeah.
instead of like just, he just fully embraced me and was like, I'm just so sorry you feel that way. And you know what? Like I felt so much better. I think because I got permission, like from my dad. And he's been
Oh
through a
yeah,
lot, recovered drug and alcohol addict. And so nobody knows grace like my dad. And I think that's why he was able to just receive me. And I didn't expect that from him. Like I fully expected the hellfire and brimstone conversation, but I just got so tired of hiding it that my mouth just like vomited and was like, I just have been wanting to kill myself. Like
right,
just
right.
I got so tired from holding in the secret. And in that moment I just felt so seen and so heard and I felt a little bit lighter like after that. Didn't
Well,
change.
it doesn't, but it does relieve the pressure.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. If you can relieve the pressure just long enough for you to manage those thoughts and get through some of the like what we've been talking about is how do I embrace that? How do I sit in that suffering
Mm-hmm.
and not let it control me, but embrace it and then, you know, put that out into the world as something better than what I've experienced.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. And I think that's the management is oh, you know what? The same thing is I'm kind of leery about this, but um, I have some pretty poignant conversations with my son, very direct and to the point, and his suffering. I don't have to. I embrace his suffering, but it's also like looking in a mirror. And it's really important to know that, especially as a child, to know that a parent can sit with you and not judge you for
It's the most powerful
yeah,
a parent can do for their child. And I think,
yeah,
I'm not a parent, so I don't know. I have a very close relationship with my sisters and like really took on a motherly role. And when they hurt, my first reaction is to stop the bleeding. Like, where is it bleeding from?
right,
How can I stop it? instead of, trusting. And my yoga mentor Jenny told me this. She said, you have to trust that everyone is a self-healing vessel.
Mm,
And that was really powerful for me
yeah.
because it was like, okay, I don't want to cheat them out of an experience to know themselves and the ability to
Right.
heal themselves. So instead of rushing to stop the bleeding, I'm going to stop and I'm just going to sit here while they're bleeding and while they are going to
Yes.
figure out how to stop it themselves. And
100%.
if they want me to grab some gauze and hand it to them,
Yeah.
I'm going to wait for that indicator, right? Like,
Yep.
or you want me to grab the scissors? Like, how can I, but not rush to it because I can't cheat them out of that experience for themselves, knowing that they are the ones that need to show up for them.
Right. And that's what I was telling my son. It's like, he's active in his addiction. I'm like, stop. Y- I was like, you're no longer a victim. If you want to change this mentality, if you want to change this path, then the first step is you are no longer a victim. You are the strength in your own life, and you're the only one that can pull you out of this. I can walk beside you. I can sit down with you. I can help you get up, but I cannot fucking carry you anymore. Or anybody for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just him, not anymore. I mean, I'll always help my son and be there. The door's always open, but you can't carry people anymore. It's too much weight. It's too much weight for you. It's too much weight for me. And now I need to put you down, sit down with your rest, and then we can get going again. And it's like, I'm just not going to carry anybody anymore, but by God, I'll walk the damn mile with you
Right. Yeah.
barefoot.
I'll walk the journey beside you.
Yeah,
Yeah. And the thing
100%.
is like, you're not, even if you could, like, you're not healing them. Like, you're giving a band-aid, you're
Right.
subsiding the moment. It's almost like
Yep.
you're delaying the inevitable or
Yes.
delaying the experience that they need.
Right. And maybe that's the hard part for, especially in counseling. It's like we're trying to fix all this past trauma. You can't fix it.
Mm-mm.
You can't band-aid it. You can't, like, why are we not telling people stop being a fucking victim? Stop
Right.
being a victim. Period. Change. Nobody's going to do this for you.
You can't
Nobody's going to help
make,
you out.
yeah, and you can't make anything go away. Like, the past is the past. What you can do is teach someone or give them the tools to allow them to learn how to operate within the handicap, right? Like, it's what you
Yeah.
were earlier when you said, like, well, I've had to accept that, like, this feeling, this, like, low grade depression and darkness, it's not going to go away from me. Like, this
Right.
is who I am.
Yep.
And so now it's like, well, how do I operate within this handicap instead of telling myself, well, someday I'm going to be better. And when I'm
Right.
better, then this is the person that I'm going to be. Like, it takes a lot of courage for you to look at that, embrace it, and say, no, maybe this is not what I wanted, or this is not what I always imagined, or this isn't what I was told was right, but this is who I am. And I'm going to embrace it. And now I'm going to learn how to work within it. And now it sounds like you're in this place of discovery where you're like, maybe this isn't a handicap. Maybe this is a thorn in my side to experience some of this suffering and be able to cultivate even deeper compassion for people and awareness for who really need it. And then you start looking at that and you're like, wow, this was maybe never a handicap to begin with. I was just kind of told it was wrong because of my expectation. Like, of
Yeah.
course, no, I don't want to feel depressed all the time, right? Like, there's all kind, like, we can all point to things that we wish we were or didn't have.
Right.
But when we start looking, like, accepting them again, like, goes back to the beginning when I was like, well, if you learn how to sit with it, then you can see it and analyze it and be like, okay, this is what I have to work with. What am I going to do with it now? How am I going
Yeah.
to utilize it?
This is the dirty clay that I I
Right.
get to play with.
Right.
You
It's
know.
like so many times I like had to sit there and I was like, okay, this is my hand. Do
Yeah.
I wish it was a better hand in poker? Yeah, but this is the hand I have. So what am I going to do? Am I going to complain about or am I going to play it? I'm going to have to
Uh,
play it and I'm going to play it the best I can.
Well, and from my understanding, you've done a really good job of rerouting what, as you face death 3 different times. and you'd mentioned it a little bit early on. You put a lot of effort forth towards physically getting healthy,
Mm-hmm.
and managing all that stuff that was happening. Like a lot of people can't do that. They can't get out of, like, I'm hurt, so I can't lift my arm. Well,
Right.
that, physical therapy. Well, physical therapist isn't doing it. Well, and that's because you got to do it on your own.
Yeah.
And you got to work, and you got to work through that pain, and most people can't work through the suffering and the physical pain. And then you have mental anguish on top of that, and mental struggles to hurdle to get out of bed. So tell us about how you've managed that, because the mentality part, and we haven't really touched on this a whole lot, but my guess is through all those surgeries, through all those cancers, through all that bad news, through the hardships that happen with family and marriage and all that, because you're
Oh, and
plagued
they're still
now.
evolving. Like I would love to
Yeah.
hand you a pretty little package and be like, look how I metabolized all this suffering into something
Right.
beautiful. Like if you were to overhear some of the conversations in the past couple of days in my house, you would be like, what? Like, what? Like, we are just now, like my husband Mike and I are just now starting to unpack like the trauma of the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And it is more painful than facing death. Like completely honest, like survivorship is worse than facing death. Like learning how to live now, it's like you went to war, you sacrificed everything you could, and now it's over and you won, quote unquote, but your entire country was destroyed as a result. And so what do you have now left? Like nothing. Nothing. Like we feel like we have nothing left. There is nothing there. So you can look at that two ways. You can be like, wow, we literally lost everything that we feel like we have emotionally, spiritually, physically. We can't build a family. Like, and that's a very small aspect, like compared to
Right.
like
Right.
emotionally and spiritually what we're trying to figure out. And then there's this other side of it where you're like, wow, okay, well, nothing's here. So now there's this opportunity to rebuild everything the way we want it. But we go back and forth between these two places of like extreme loss, and then there's like all of this like hope, right? But then it feels so overwhelming and so massive to try to rebuild at this point that we're all
Sure.
just tapped. It's like, after a
Yeah.
war, you're tapped. You're like, with what resources? Where are we going to get the materials to
Right.
rebuild? Like,
Right.
just going to self-generate? Like, where's it going to come from?
Wow. So what are your thoughts on that? Where is it going to come from? Is there healing in this process? I mean, is there, obviously you have a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
And obviously so does he, because it's still, you guys are still working at it. And I'm sure there's good days in there, but there's 5 years of not only just 5 years of suffering, of going, I mean, it's taxing for both of you on this realm, but how long were you married before
We were
all
married
this
for
started?
4 years.
So you're really just getting into starting your life with each other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then this happens, and now you guys are what, 10 years in? 9 years
We're
in?
9 years in. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's that's like having a sextuplets right out of the gate. I mean,
Oh
it's
my
like
God. Yeah.
your whole life is like, now you don't get to, you're so caught up in taking care of your health that now you don't get to have a relationship.
Oh yeah, that's gone. Like that. I mean, and the reason why I'm trying to be honest about this is not to like overshare, but to also bring awareness that for people that are in
Yes.
this situation with a spouse, these are the things that people don't talk to you about. They don't talk to you
Right.
about survivorship because your oncologist is so focused on you surviving that once you survive and you're in remission, they're like, okay, great, check. Like nobody having resources on what to do in the aftermath is really hard. And we've, had this 3 times in 5 years. It's been nonstop. 2 years ago when we thought I was going to die, which very well, like I get tested all the time because I'm at such high risk. So I'm not saying that this can't happen. Like I'm not out of the clear. Okay. We're
Right.
learning how to operate within that space. He quit his job to work from home and do bookkeeping so that he could take me to my appointments and that we could spend time together and have all of that time together, because we were like, "Oh, if we only have 6 months, what's the most important thing?" Well, it's time. It's time together,
Sure.
But he also became my full-time caretaker. And so, we moved from a romantic relationship to all of this stress, to friends, to partners, to now you're my nurse. And now I have to like nag you for everything. And now you have to worry about me dying. And, like stress really takes its toll on the romantic and intimate
Oh,
relationship side.
yeah.
And so now we're looking at each other and we're like, okay, well, where did that go? Is there even a chance that we can cultivate it? Because I also went through a huge physical transformation.
Sure. Yeah.
Like I did not look the same. Like I gained like 60 pounds. I I stopped being able to physically go places. Like when we had to like stop hiking and stop walking and like stop running, like that really was hard because that was a huge way that we connected. And yeah, I don't have any answers.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
know that there's this, it's like you have to have hope for something better, but you also have to sit in the reality that this could be the rest of your life. And so what are you going to do with it? And how do you maintain hope, but also like the understanding of truly being where you're at and being present. But then when you're present is like kind of shitty, how do you still sit in that? I don't really know. But we're
Yeah.
trying to
So,
navigate that right now.
and that's fair. Do you guys have the resources available to you to manage that,
Yeah,
like
I
with
think so. I mean,
therapy
we
and
have a
stuff?
really strong community.
Yeah.
And we're really lucky because we have really good friends. Like I shared with a few friends this week of kind of just the reality of like how hard things are. And, where do I go from here? And, the conversations that we're having to have. And, I was met with so much acceptance, so much compassion, so much understanding. Nobody trying to like change the situation or trying to like, well, let's look at it this way, like, let's look at it differently. It was like, oh, this is how you're seeing it right now. Like, this is really hard for you.
Yeah.
Sorry that
Yeah.
it's so hard. Let me sit in this hard space with you. And I was just like blown away by the love of, yeah, that's really tough. And I'm so lucky that my friends are so brave. My
Yeah.
community is so brave.
When you have, if I've read this correctly, you guys have pretty much the same like friend group
Yeah, we do.
and
Because
your
he moved out
family.
from here, from Hawaii. So
Okay.
yeah, when we got married, or we were married when we moved back together, we developed the same friend group together.
Yeah, and your family absolutely loves your husband. Like
Yeah, they adore
they
him.
yeah, they like he's not a bad guy is what I'm getting at. Is like
Yes,
he's
no,
not a dick or anything like that.
no.
He's actually a really good guy, and this these events in the last 5 years have really taken its toll on you and him.
Yeah, but I
Um
mean, I really want to draw attention to him because it's like,
right.
as a cancer patient, like the spotlight's going to be on the cancer patient, right?
Exactly.
Like
Yeah.
the spotlight's not on the caretaker, not on the husband, like not on the
Ever.
person that's like the sounding board. Like he is
Yeah.
the absorber. So like I'm not yelling and screaming at my sister who's been my, transplant donor. I'm not yelling and
Right.
screaming at my friends. Like who am I yelling and screaming at? I'm yelling and screaming at my caretaker, who's also my husband, who's also my best friend, and he's absorbing so much of this. Like, and that was like one of the conversations we had last night is he was like, I wanted to take away so much of the pain from you, but like I absorbed so much that I was never supposed to absorb.
Yeah.
And I didn't do what I needed to do to take care of myself
Yeah.
because all I could do was see this massive amount of your pain that you were in. And I was going to try to absorb whatever I could for as long as I could. And I did that way too long. And now I'm having to deal with the consequences of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, that's hard for me to hear. First of all, it's very brave of him to say, because he's telling me, the cancer patient that's already like having to deal with this like disease that she doesn't want, basically have her husband tell her that, he's in this terrible spot because
Right.
he saw how much pain she was in. And then there's that relationship, right? Where you're like, okay, like, and I imagine people who deal with suicide feel the same way. Well, if I tell you this, then what is this pain going to then do
Right.
to you?
Yep.
And how are you going to metabolize that or not metabolize it? And then that's going to bounce back on me because it's going to be like, well, I caused this pain. So then
Yep.
I'm just not going to share.
Yep.
And if we trust that somebody is a self-healing vessel, then we can trust that they are going to either receive it the way that they're supposed to or decide to leave some of it outside of themselves if they have to also.
Yes.
And we have to trust that people can make decisions for themselves regarding how they're going to heal and how they're going to metabolize pain and suffering.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's
I
like,
know. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so it's like, yes, what he said was true. And that's awful. But also he made that choice. But now he's making the choice to heal that. And he's, looping me in on that and telling me that. And I'm just so grateful that we're able to have that conversation. Like, that's a really hard conversation to have.
Well, yeah, and when the communication stops, so does the relationship. I mean,
Yes.
period. So as long as you have some sort of communication, and I mean communication, I don't mean yelling, arguing,
Yeah.
getting pissed over everything. It's like, and this isn't for you. This is for people out there. It's like, but when you choose to be vulnerable and expose the inner depths of your pain and suffering, at least what it looks like to you, to somebody else, then there's opportunity to heal.
Yes.
Without that communication, there's really no opportunity to heal. It's really just
Yeah.
to move in a different direction.
Yeah.
And hold resentment. So I have a friend, and I love this statement. I've said it a few times, especially recently. I've lost several friendships this year due to circumstance, not to death, and she's like, and I'm a person who plays the tape. I'm like, what did I do wrong? How did this play out? This is what I did. Did I really do anything wrong? Why are people acting this way? Why am I a target in this? And it's like, she's like, well, the way I see things is that they serve their purpose in my life, and I don't need to be mad about that. It's actually taken a lot of judgment out of it for me. And I've served my purpose in their life. And I find that so beautiful. Like,
That is so beautiful.
well, yeah,
That's
now I'm not
forever.
angry about the end, because, that 12 years or that 30 years or that 5 years, that was a good friendship, and it was
Right.
beautiful. And this ending was not so good.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it played out in the end is very uncomfortable, but that didn't define that 12 years, that 5 years, that 30 years, that 10 years, that it doesn't define any of that. It's actually like, no, I can embrace that 12 years. Like, this was a beautiful time for me. And
Yeah.
it
No, I think
takes,
that's so beautiful.
yeah, and we're so judged on, so many times we're judged on a single event in our life that defines a relationship. And it's like, well, that's just one event. What about all the other good stuff? We always
Right.
forget about the
Don't
good
throw it
stuff.
out.
Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
just like, I'm really embracing that for myself. And I'm like, because it's hard for me. I feel rejected. I feel abandoned. I feel all these things that I felt when I was a kid. All that shit comes right back to the surface when when something goes wrong, even when somebody confronts me about something I've done wrong or unintentionally, I'm like, I really fucked up. It's like, no, you didn't really fuck up. It's just, you made a mistake. One
Yeah.
mistake that looks very similar, that drew out the similar feelings of something you did 30 years ago. That's
Yeah.
not the
There's
definition of
something.
who you are.
Yeah. It's like pulling on a thread.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love
Yeah.
that term, pulling on the thread, the anger thread. It's like the puppet master of strings, and you
Right.
are your own puppet master in a lot of ways. And things do get out of control sometimes, but if you're the puppet master, you have the ability to mend the things that are going on
Mm-hmm.
in front of you, and not let them be the definition of what used to be.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. You have the here and now, like that may have happened in the past, but ultimately the past is not what determines what happens right now.
right.
Like we are what determines what happens right now, even in spite of what has happened in the past.
Yeah, even in the midst of how it's formed and shaped us,
Right.
um, we
But
we
we
can
tell
change.
ourselves that
Yes,
story that, oh, because this happened, it's going to happen this way, or it determines, like we've already allowed, like we're allowing the past to like write this story when it's like, That's not true. Like what writes the story is like what's happening right now.
Yeah, it's just those are evidential pieces that say if you do this, this is the result.
Yeah.
But the evidence, okay, now I have the evidence. Now I can say, oh, well, that doesn't have to be the result. Now I can reroute and make this
Yes.
something different.
Yes. I like how you use the term evidence, like the past is evidence.
Yes.
It doesn't dictate, but it can be evidence
Yep.
for what you choose to do.
Right. Right.
I like
So
that.
how I want to go back to your husband a little bit because I think that's important,
Yeah.
and we don't put enough emphasis on those that stay by us, that stand by us, that walk with us. And I find this in my own life, as I look back and I'm walking towards my own death, it's like I didn't think I had anybody there, but the reality is I had many, many people there. I just had blinders on and I didn't see the value of it. And that's the detriment of, I say detriment of who I am. The beauty of who I am is what I've become and what I am becoming. But the detriment is that I didn't see the value in those people that stood by me for a long period of time in my suffering. So, um, so yeah, let's go back to Micah and recognize some of those things that he has done for you, because now we're starting to enter back into the present, um, the moment, the beauty, because you guys have gone through all the suffering. You're kind of on that other side. You're on that. Well, you're not on the other side, but
It would
you're enter.
appear, right?
Yeah,
It would
you're entering
appear,
into it. Yeah.
even though it feels like it's only just started because we're recognizing it and we're seeing like we've had this hope like, well, when you're better, this is
Right.
the life we're going to have together. And so we had to have that really hard conversation a couple weeks ago as I was like, this is our life. And it might not be our life forever, but it looks like that it's going to be. And things get worse. Like I'm on prednisone, I'm off prednisone, and for those of you who don't know, like this is a really intense steroid that
Yeah.
degrades your muscle development and prohibits the forming of new muscles. It makes you very emotional, it makes you suicidal, it makes you depressed, it makes you angry, it makes you lash out, like, but it also saves your life. And so, so I have this like medication that's inducing this behavior that is extremely inappropriate at times, and like he's having to absorb that. And I'm constantly having to add new specialists. I have more specialists and more doctors seeing me than I ever have in my entire life. And if he wants to stay with me, that's what his life is going to look like for the foreseeable future for right now. And I'm not saying this to be hopeless and be like, oh, I have no hope of being cured and living a normal life again. I'm saying this because if I don't sit with what's really happening
Exactly.
and can't really look at it, how am I going to metabolize it and pick it up and use it? And so if this is who I am, much like you had to come to terms with, if I'm just going to be depressed all the time and have this feeling of darkness, how am I going to use it? Now, of course, you want to hope that it will get better, but you can't put all of your eggs in the hope basket because
Right.
then that causes you to stay out of the present because you're like, oh, I'm not going to be here because I'm hoping for a better moment ahead. Right? That's
Yeah.
not appropriate either. And
Right.
so we had to have that conversation of like, do you want this to be your life? It's okay if you don't want it to be your life because the position that he's in, like he's having to give a lot up of his identity. He's having to give a lot in his time. He's having to give a lot energetically, emotionally. Like we live a life where he was like, well, it's just hard for me to plan because I just don't have a normal week. And I was like, the fact that you think you're entitled to a normal week, I was like, that's a huge disconnect right there. I was like, at any point we'll have to have an unexpected ER visit or a
Yeah.
hospital visit, or, I'm bleeding here. And so we've got to go to the ER, like I said, that's going to be your life. So you have to learn if you want to accept that. And I think that's really hard for him because he sees, he has this idea, right, of what he thought, what we both thought we were getting when we got married.
Yes. Yep.
And it's not what we thought. I always thought I would be the caretaker. I'm an amazing caretaker. I'm the oldest of five. I'm like the mother hen. Like I just always thought I would be on the other end of this. To be on the receiving end is really hard because I'm the one constantly in a vulnerable state.
Yep. It's
So,
terrible.
yeah. And it's like, it's hard for him because it's like, do you want to live with somebody like that you constantly have to take care of? And now we're having to assess like this romantic part of our relationship and be like, okay, are we going to be able to ever get this back? Or are we just going to be stuck in this like caretaker friend role forever? Are we going to be able to cultivate, that intimacy? Now we have intimacy, like we have deep conversations, like we are emotionally wide open. Like there's nothing at this point that hasn't been said or exchanged or shared.
Right.
And that's really powerful, I think. And that's really amazing. But I still feel like, we're in the middle of this and it's so hard for me to look at him and look at all of his potential and see that my illness has like taken so much from him. Like, of course, yes, at the end of the day, did he make that decision? Yeah. But
Yeah.
I still, like, because of my situation, I still took and I'm still taking a lot.
Yeah, you had said something. I listened to your interview and well, I don't love it, but I like the way you put it. And I think it was something along the lines that cancer is still taking from me, even though I don't have it, or it's still,
Yeah. Yeah. It was something
yeah,
really similar to that. But yeah, I mean,
it
it is.
keep
It
taking
continues to take.
even though it's not present,
Yeah.
which is interesting. Because it's still taking, but you still have that past that your guys are trying to work through.
Right.
So it's still taking more um than what you can afford, really.
Right. And I think, what's hard is I used to see this situation as very black or white. Either I like sit in the pain and the reality of what's happening, and that is victimization, or I compartmentalize it and I hide it all, and I just decide to be really grateful to be here, and then that's good. And I think like what's hard for me to accept is neither one of those options are right.
Right.
They're like they're not good solutions. Like they might be good for a time, but I
Yes.
have to sit in this space where it's like I have to be honest about what I'm facing. And then I also have to decide what I'm going to do with it and make that choice. So I have to understand it for what it is and I can't shut it down and I have to feel the hard feelings, which nobody wants to do. It would be just easier to compartmentalize them. But you can only do that for so long.
Right.
And that affects you. It affects the people around you. And so we're in this place where we're like, okay, we're going to be honest about what we're facing. But then when you're honest about it, it can be daunting and it can be difficult. But then we have to decide how we're going to move forward in it. And, I think we're having to take it. I hate that phrase, like day by day, but it's like we're having to renew that decision every day we wake up. And I
Yeah.
imagine, much like somebody who struggles with suicide, that's the same time. You have to decide if you're going to continue to be here every day that you wake up.
Well, and that's I talk to people and entering into it, even though I'm walking in this path, I'm talking to people who are suffering. I'm like, the question is why? Why do you continue to get out of bed? Why do you continue to do it? If this is the quality of your life, why are you putting so much effort into suffering on a daily basis? And I'm looking back, I'm like, well, why did you do it? Why did I do it? Why? I it's a question I'll be wrestling with for
It's a
a
great
time
question.
here. What's that?
That's a really good question.
And I can't figure it out. Like I feel for 50 years I've felt hopeless. Um, not all of that 50 years, but most of that 50 years. Like the last 5 have been joyful and happy and good and not without hardship and not without depression and not without suffering, but the mentality is different and the switch is different. So I'm just like, I look at, I hate to say this, man. I hate to say this, but I look at certain people. I'm like, I don't know that you can get out of this.
Mm.
It takes like the level of despair that you feel that's a dark, dark place. And I guess I'm reflecting what I've felt my entire life, and I'm like, why couldn't I pull the trigger? Why couldn't I do it? Well, there's this fortitude that happens when you go to take your life. You like, it's permanent. That's it. There's no going back. It's like taking somebody else's life. You cannot take it back. So I think that's one of the big things. But in that level of despair, what does it matter? You know, I'm trying to wrap my head around this, because I'm not a big advocate for suicide. I do think it's altruistic. I think it's one of the most altruistic things that you can do. I think it's the one thing that you actually have control over. You have the control over life and death for yourself and for other people if you're batshit nuts. But I don't. It's a terrible thing to even think or put out there, because it's like, well, then you're encouraging somebody to give up, and I'm not. I'm like, I want to know where you're finding hope. I want to know why you're getting out of bed every day and why it's so important, and what are those reasons? Because for a long time it was my kids, or it was something outside of me, or this fear of hell. But when you live in hell, that fear of hell goes away. It's like,
Right.
I'm here
Yeah, this is
already.
so bad. What really could be worse, probably.
Yeah. It's like, I do have this some semblance of my spiritual connection that has probably kept me from taking my own life at some point along that path. But now that I've come to this point, I'm like, I don't even care anymore. Like, the hell I'm living in is much worse than the fear of the unknown. Like, I don't know if there's a heaven. I don't know if there's a hell, but I know what it feels like to live in hell, metaphorically. So yeah, those are just questions that I wrestle with. I'm wrestling with it right now, and I don't even know where I'm going with that or how to formulate that into our conversation, because I forgot where I was
Well,
going with it. But
no, so you asked, like, well, what is the reason for people to get out of bed? And so I kind of want to bring that back around to what you said something earlier where you talked about, well, maybe this pain, maybe it's for a reason, right? When you were kind of talking about learning
yep,
how to sit with some of those feelings. And then you asked me a little bit ago, you said, well, I'm curious to know, like, what kept you going in terms of, like when you physically couldn't get out of bed and mentally and things like that. So I think we can circle all that back around to kind of
sure,
what you're talking about here. And I don't want to distill this down to make it sound like, oh, here's the solution, because that's definitely not what I'm saying.
right,
So what I want to invite is the question of, like, you know, how important is purpose to people? And what happens when someone has purpose, truly has purpose, okay, that they feel resonates with their heart and from their soul, and when they are operating out of that. And I think purpose is really, really important. And I
it's
could
key.
hear something in your voice when you talked about, like, the purpose or meaning behind some of these feelings and some of the suffering for you. Like, there was like a light that went off. There was like a love, like, out of that. And, for me, like, getting out of bed, I had to find a purpose, and I had to meditate on things that I felt like that I was created for, or that was important. And I had to think about what was happening to me and how terrible it was to the rest of my family and to my husband, and how detrimental it was to my marriage. And I thought, nothing is going to give this a meaning. This is going to be suffering for the sake of suffering if I don't do something with it. If I don't look it in the face and
Mm,
I don't see how to reshape or reform this. And then I thought about other people that I had read about or seen that had had cancer and that didn't have the courage to face it, didn't even have the courage to, like, ask how much time they had. so that they could, fully live out their days with their loved ones. Or for other people that didn't have like the strength to try to do what they needed to get healthier, even though it was a slow process that almost seemed like there wasn't any point because you have all these other like chronic illnesses, going on. But I had to create a purpose for myself. And if I didn't create a purpose for myself there, I wouldn't have been able to get out of bed. And so I just wonder, I think as human beings, we're meant to have purpose, but not the purpose that
100%.
society gives us. Okay. Not the
Right.
like, oh, like go work really hard so that you can have a retirement fund so that you can play golf in Sarasota or go hunt seashells on the beach. Like that's not the type of purpose that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the type of purpose where, you can watch somebody heal, or you can provide laughter to somebody, or you can make art that changes someone's perspective, right, in life, or you can show up for somebody. I mean, purpose, and that's the thing, is like bringing it back to the present moment. Like I had to ask myself, like I felt so much like a complete wasteless piece of shit because I couldn't do anything or contribute. I had to
Hmm.
look at the moment and think, what is my purpose in this moment? Who am I surrounded by? Okay, I'm surrounded by these nurses in this hospital on this bed, and I'm not going anywhere, and my family's not here, but these are my people. So what is my
Right.
purpose? And
Yep.
that tuned me in. And by tuning in, all of a sudden I started to notice the things that were happening, the conversations that I had, the moments that could be facilitated by me and another person, even the conversations with, like, my doctors are humans with
Right.
feelings and thoughts and
Yep.
things going on, right? So how can I break this robotic exchange that we're having, and how can we be human together? And can that be enough for me? Like, our purpose doesn't have to be this grand giant, splash. It can be these small energetic moments that we're having with people that's saying, I'm a human and you're a human. And how can I reach for that goodness that's inside of you? Because I know it's there. And how can I allow you to touch that goodness inside of me? And letting that be enough. And I started to realize, like, well, I'm still having these moments. And if I can like step out, when I'm not feeling these painful feelings, right? Like, how can I step outside of that and allow these things to be enough for me? And that really helped a lot. And, that's also why I stayed in my master's program when I got re-diagnosed. Like everybody else would have dropped out. And I'm like, because I even told the chair, I was like, I'm probably not going to live to graduation, but I need to stay in this program because I need to have purpose going through this. Because
Mm.
when I'm in the hospital bed and I can't get out, I need to at least be able to reach for an iPad and think, well, I've got to turn in this paper because this school's too expensive to flunk. Like
Yeah.
I
I
had to
found that
create.
really interesting that you started that in the middle of this whole, like, well, this detriment to your life. Like
Yeah.
you're like, no, I'm gonna go do this.
Yeah.
And
And part of it was ego. It was like, okay, if I die, I want them to be like, well, she died still trying to go to
try and
school. Like, like she died trying to do something for the world. Like you think about like, how are people going to view you when you die? And I'm like, well, at least I want them to say I was trying.
right, right. Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's good. But it also by it's almost that caring about what other people think mentality that
Yeah.
pushed you into doing something and giving you purpose.
Yeah.
Um, so even though that might not be the best, because we generally try to, well, at least my thought process, you do it for yourself.
Right.
But you entered into that and maybe a ill, I don't want to say it that way.
I didn't have the greatest intentions, like I
Right.
was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
well,
There you
I
go.
want people to perceive me as like a hard worker and someone who doesn't give up. So I'm not going to give up, and eventually like that was purified in
Right.
doing that. It became something for myself. But yeah, don't wait to start something until you have good intentions, because you know what? I think that's bullshit. I've started a lot of things
Yeah.
with intentions for other people or how I look or something like that. And then it eventually becomes my own intention in pursuing that. But yeah, if I were to wait to start something until I had a good
Yeah.
intention, I would probably never start anything.
Well, and people are so afraid of the fake it till you make it, but that's how you get there.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to be nice to people until I'm actually nice to people.
Feeling it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that was actually a really good interaction. And I really meant that. But it took
Yes.
me
So many
faking
times.
it. Yeah. To get
Yeah,
to
I've
that
had those
point.
moments with people where I've been like thinking in my head, like, oh, this lady's such a bitch, but I guess I'll just kind of like be
Right.
nice. And through the conversation, then all of a sudden she shares something with me that's like heart shattering, right? That
Right.
blows me wide open. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, my breath is taken away. And
Yeah.
I'm like, if I would have walked into this conversation with the way I felt, I would have missed this moment with this woman.
100%.
And now I'm the one being fed, right? And I'm totally humbled and on the receiving end. And it's totally a reminder. Yeah.
Right. I don't know where those thumbs come from. I have no
No.
idea because they're not live. I don't know what that means. So I think it's the Riverside people looking at us. They're like, because it goes to all these different computers and then that way the video's good and stuff like that. So there's assumptively, there's several people monitoring the
Oh,
conversation at any given time. That's my assumption. I don't know if that's true, but
yeah.
there's these thumbs up that happen
Yeah.
periodically.
That I was like,
That
all
was a
right.
good
So
statement.
resonates, I suppose.
Right.
um, but yeah, I think, I wonder, like, do we suffer like just from a lack of purpose? And
Yes.
and
100%.
do we feel so entrapped because we're taking on other people's purposes for our lives that don't belong
Yes.
to us at all? And it's like, I almost
Yes.
wonder this, like, I've been thinking a lot about like suicide, obviously, because of your podcast. And like, and I'm prepared, like, because winter it gets really bad and I'm still on prednisone, and I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, what am I gonna do to like mitigate this stuff? But I thought, what would it be like if you like planned your death? You didn't really die, right? But you like planned your death, had a death party, and it was like, okay, this person's dead. And now you're free to go do whatever you want. Like, what's in your heart's purpose? What's on your heart's desire? So you pretend that this person like died. So now you like, which is you, quote unquote, but now you're still alive. And if you did that, what would be the thing that you would go do, that you would go live out? How would you go live out your life?
Yes. This is the beauty. I love that you said this because this is what happens, especially. Well, I shouldn't be doing this. I would not do that without walking down this path, without walking towards my death. I would not be on a podcast right now. I would not have started this because I don't feel adequate. I don't feel like I have a good voice. I don't feel like I have purpose. Like I'm adequately equipped to speak out into the world's lives. And that's not just one individual. I'm entering into not just my life, but many lives, hypothetically, maybe even realistically. I'm entering into this realm where I'm now walking in a darkness that most people feel. And yeah, I can do that on an individual basis. I can meet you at a party and we can have a deep conversation and move on, and maybe we affect each other's lives. But this is not me. This is not who I am. So it ends up becoming a reinvention of who you really are, what your potential really is. And I
Mhm.
didn't discover that till I stripped myself of everything. I gave everything away. I gave my bus away. I gave my possessions away. I was like, I'm going. So
I don't
this
need
is it.
this.
Yeah. Like and even as I'm giving things away, I found that I held tight to certain things. I'm like, none of this is my old self. None of it matters. And so now I'm in this process of there's this development happening deep within me. It's a stirring of the soul. This, even now I'm sitting in my faith. I'm sitting with it. I'm not just speaking. I'm not just praying for people. I'm not just praying for myself. I'm sitting in my faith, which is weird because I'm not like, I've decided I'm not going to be ashamed of my belief system anymore because it's been so beautiful for me. And I'm so sick and tired of not sharing that beauty because people are offended by the word Jesus Christ. I am too. I'm totally offended by it. But I love Christ and I love the story of Christ. I love what he represented. I love that if people don't accept you, you just dust your feet off and you move to the next and you love whoever wants to be accepting, whoever wants to accept that love. And then you get to accept their love. And it's like, but I don't have to please everybody and I don't have to do it for everybody. And
And you
like
should.
I'm like doing
Not,
this because
yeah.
it's this beautiful transition that's happening inside me, but I'm still like, the problem is that I insured my path before this ever came to fruition. And the scary part. So now I'm sitting in my faith, and it's like I can't control anything outside of what I don't know anymore, and I don't know how to do this, but I keep getting this feedback like, you're doing a really great job, you're doing this. I'm like, this isn't about me. This is for people out there. Like, I don't know, there's this weird transition going on. It's like, so I heard this Orthodox
You're
priest.
becoming. Like, this is
Yes.
your becoming.
Yes. So, and I heard this, it really impacted me because I feel this way. And he's like, I never face my congregation. I'm always facing away from them. And people get so upset because I'm facing away from them, but I'm facing the same God they are. And I'm like, oh my God. He's like, I'm not the important one. This is not about me. This is about worshiping something that I find so beautiful. And I do it with the people that choose to walk with me in that. I found it really beautiful that he's facing his faith and
Very
is no longer that attention.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. And I don't know where your faith is anymore. I know that's a big struggle for most people, especially probably in your situation. So,
Well, it's funny because it's not because of cancer. Like, I mean, it's
because you grew up in the
I'm
Christian,
not mad about having cancer. And people would probably like challenge me to be like, oh, you're deflecting or you haven't really
right?
like, no, I'm not mad about having cancer. Like, I'm frustrated and angry at my quality of life, like many times.
100%. Yep.
And I
Yep.
hate like having to deal with pain on a daily basis. And I hate the damage that it's caused. But I mean, it's like there's so much richness that I've been able to experience in the darkness. Like,
Mhm.
I'm sure you understand that. Like, that
Yeah.
people will never who go through life without, experiencing pain, like they won't know joy like I have. Like,
Right.
they won't know intimacy like I've had. Like,
Yep.
they won't know, like, there's so many things that when you experience on a deep dark level, you get to experience the opposite side of that as well. And so it's like, I knew from a young age, like I grew up in a church where they preached that life is suffering, and that if it is anything that you're guaranteed on this earth, you are guaranteed suffering. So I did not get the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. So I knew like suffering was coming
That's
for me one way or another. I just thought I was going to be a missionary martyr. But then I met Micah and fell in love, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to go be a missionary now, but maybe later we'll go be missionaries. Now I can't say the same for his faith. Like, his faith is very different. And I mean, his dad was a pastor and a missionary. He grew up in Micronesia and Hawaii, and, has Bible verses on his arms and a giant Bible on his back. Like, but he told me, I will never step foot in a church again.
huh. Yeah.
So, I mean, he has a very different relationship with that. And I think one thing that we have done really well is we finally learned how to split our faith and understand that we are both, even though we're married, we're both on a separate journey, and there's no need for us to be running at the same pace or even in the same direction.
Do you guys talk about your faith with each other?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So
But
even though
I
there's
think,
a separation of faith, you can still have a conversation.
oh
I find
yeah,
that very beautiful.
and share. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think it is. But I think it was very hard for us because I put a lot of pressure on him very early in our relationship with that spiritual kind of stereotype of a man and a woman to become one. He's your spiritual leader. You have to be
Right.
on the same page. Da, 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 da. So I really put a lot of pressure on him. I was like, you better be praying with me every day, reading the
Mm.
Bible to me, like washing my feet, like maybe not the
Right.
last one, but like, I
But you
really
could. Yeah.
right. I really took that role seriously. And why did I take that seriously? Because of Christian culture, because the
Mhm.
church told me to do it, not because Jesus told me to do that or the Bible told me to do that, but because church said, here's what a Christian marriage looks like.
Right.
And it did not work for us. It caused a lot of frustration. And when I let go of that, here's what's funny. I've never really felt like God has spoken to me, except on maybe like 2 occasions. I can be like, okay, that was God's voice. And one of the occasions was when I was like really struggling with this concept, was God was like, you're not responsible for Micah's relationship with me. That's between him and I. And also, you can't use him as a crutch to not be growing with me either because
Oh,
he's behind. And I was like, ooh,
yeah. That's
called
a kick in the
out.
chooch.
Yeah. I was like, what are you God? He's like, because like Micah's in a different place. You're using that as an excuse not to grow. And I'm growing you in a totally different direction than I'm growing him. Are you crazy? Like, why would two people grow in the exact same direction at the same time? And I was like, well, because the church told me. He's like, yeah, the church told you. Like,
Yes.
this is the conversation that I legitimately had in my head. And so, I mean, I felt relieved at that point. And so I apologized to Micah and I was like, I feel like I'm doing a lot wrong here. I'm listening to the church, but I'm not listening to God.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ow.
So
Wow. Yeah,
my
that's
only rule has been now recently follow the peace. And if there's peace, then I'm going to assume that's where God is. And if there's not peace, you're not going to find me there.
one again, go back to if you dust your feet off.
Right.
When there's not peace, that means that there's turmoil, and that means people aren't listening to you and you're not listening to them. So there's no point in having the conversation.
Right.
I think that's the point of that. It's
Yeah.
like if there's no reciprocation, then move on.
And I think
Because
you can even take that a step further of what you were saying earlier. It's like, you're not going to be everybody's cup of tea. Like,
right.
Jesus wasn't expected. He didn't expect to be received by everybody. He was like, hey,
No.
if you want it, cool. If not, I'm moving on. Like, no
No.
hurt feelings, like no frustration. Like, I'm not mad about it. Like, it's
No,
fine.
no condemnation.
Yeah.
You're
Big
not going
deal.
to hell just because you didn't listen to me.
Right.
It's like,
I'm moving on.
well, and what I find in it is like, I've offered you a way to find life in this life. That's it.
Yeah.
I find that very, very beautiful. And I think, and the church would say, well, that's heaven or hell. You either choose life or you choose death. And it's like, no, that's not Christ at all. And we don't get to choose that within 80 years, especially when we don't really understand it or know that much about it. My theory is we're on a diving board up there and we're like, hey, I want to check out what it's like to understand at least a little bit of what good and evil look like. Can I go down God per se? He's like, yeah, pink. Go ahead. Go try it. Go see what it's about. And when you're done, remember that I'm your king. Remember that I'm your father and that you can come home. And that's the story of the prodigal son per se is, and Pete Holmes, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a Christian comedian, author, screenwriter, stuff, something like the actor. But he's like, the story of the prodigal son is that, do you know the story?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the son comes to his father, who's a king or whatever, and he's like, hey, I want my inheritance. He's like, the father's like, yeah, go do whatever you want. The kid goes, spends all of it, ends up in the pig shit, and remembers that my father's a king, and maybe I can go work in the lowliest of his household as his son. Maybe he'll let me come back home. And he walks home, and the father runs to him with the finest silken robe and welcomes his son home. He's, you've returned to me. And he's happy, and tells the younger son or the older boy to go kill the fattened calf and let's have a meal and, celebrate in the celebration that my son is home. And maybe that's all we have to do is remember that we're the prodigal sons, and
Absolutely. I think
that we can always go home.
That is such a good reminder for not just like our relationship, to God, but our relationship with people.
Yeah.
Like when people wrong us and they come back, are we able to receive
Welcome.
them
Yeah.
anew? Are we able to trust the goodness that's inside of them? Or are we going to, hold a grudge? And this is not to belittle the pain that people cause, right? Like that prodigal son caused a lot of pain.
A lot.
Probably for his family, for his brothers, for his sisters, right? And so let's not
for his father.
ignore the pain, right, that he caused in his family, he caused a lot of pain. Okay. So it's not to overlook the pain that we feel as people and to belittle that and be like, okay, it doesn't matter. Like, oh, he's coming back. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, like, can we hold our own pain and deal with it? And then can we also receive someone back again with open arms, fully loving them and understanding, that they are good still.
Well, and can we remember while we're sleeping in the pig shit that we're worth something
Yeah,
and that we
absolutely.
can go home and that,
That doesn't change. And I
right?
think the overwhelming story, point of the story, right, is that who he was never changed that entire time, right?
Right.
And so it's like when you're feeling deep, dark feelings, right? Or there are people even that you were saying like, man, they're so deep, I don't know if they can get out. It's like, yeah, but who they are deep down, like I believe that everyone, and I know this is going to ruffle a lot of feathers. I don't care. This is how I feel right now. Okay, that could
Sure.
change as I receive new information, but I really do feel that everybody is truly good inside. And then there are things that happen,
I
right? That
agree.
create turmoil, that create
Yeah.
these things that surround them. But deep down, like there is a part of them that is good. It just gets completely eclipsed.
Yep.
And
That's the
can
Dahmer. That's the Hitler. That's
yeah, right? Like
encompassing.
completely
That's,
eclipsed, like
yep.
just gone. But that I do believe that at one point, like they were like good inside. And so it's like, can we reach for that in humanity and remember, like you said, that about ourselves, that this is who we are, like we are God's children. There is, part of God in us, and that will never change.
Yep. So I've got a little more taboo for you.
Oh.
So through my prayer and through this path, you talked about hearing God's voice only a couple times. Well, I hear it fairly regularly. At least it's the only voice that I've had to guide me. And if I look at that, I can look at that two different ways. Well, it's that voice has gotten me here, or that voice has actually gotten me here.
Right. I was gonna say, yeah.
Like I'm right here for this reason, for this purpose, for all my detriment, everything. That voice has led me to this seemingly on the outside very detrimental place, but well, maybe even on the outside it looks like a very good place. Like
Right.
it's very difficult to decipher the two sometimes, but
It could be both.
yeah.
It can be this and that.
And this, yes,
Mm-hmm.
this and this. It's both simultaneously. It's the good and the bad, the beauty and the ugly. It's
The yin and yang.
yeah, it's really entering into it simultaneously. It's so weird for me because usually it's one overpowers the other, and now it's both walk side by side. But as I've walked down this path, and this was very, very taboo for any sort of faith-based religion, is that as I pray and I feel this detriment and I feel this peace and I feel this turmoil, is that voice is like, you can come home. You can come home. It's okay. You can take your life, Britton. It's okay. I love you no matter what. It's okay. It's a weird, and and the counterintuitive in that is like, that is not what I've been taught. That is not what God would ever say. But if
And feel like an overwhelming sense of peace when you hear that voice.
yes, yeah. So I've felt the encompassment of the darkness, literal. I see things. I have visions. Since I was 18, I remember my first thing of sight, you might say. And those, in general, they come to fruition. Some have not, but for the most part, but I don't generally talk about it with people because it's it's very uncomfortable. You become very weird, schizophrenic, whatever. The problem with me is that I'm actually sane. Even as I say I'm going to go take my life, it's very hard to argue with me because it's not an emotional decision. It's a sane,
Very logical.
logical decision. Like I've done the math, I've done the calculation. That what I can't account for is the spiritual aspect of it, and that's why we're sitting here today.
Mm.
The logic says yes, the spirituality says no. This is a purpose.
I would challenge you. I mean, I don't think suicide is right for a variety of reasons, but I can't point to anywhere in the Bible where it says like you're going to go to hell if you take your life. Like, just like we can argue that with other things. I'm not going to get specific because I don't want to open up that can of worms. That people say, "Oh, you can't do this because the Bible says that," and I'm like, "Well, where in the Bible does it say that? Oh, you can't find it? Oh, okay."
Yeah.
And that's just part of church culture. Like, or that's a good practice. Like, I'm not arguing that these things aren't good things that build holiness or character in us. I'm not saying that they're bad, but I'm saying like, well, don't put words in the Bible that aren't there. You know, let's say that these are best practices for a Christian to lead a holy life, but let's not say the Bible says that, because it doesn't.
Yeah. And the argument there for Christians is that it's in the commandments. Thou shalt not murder. So that's self-murder. Well, there's just also this argument that thou shalt not kill. And that's the actual translation.
And we're in war, and God commands war all the time.
We're not only in war, but we kill for our food.
Right.
Whether it be plants or animals, we kill for our food. Mm-hmm. So there's this, it's like you're just making up stuff to justify.
You're just kind of using it to fit your agenda that you feel with based on certain things. Yeah. And then, I mean, we do that with everything, right? Like we search for an answer and there it is. But here's a question that I have for you. Okay. Because I have a very different viewpoint on euthanasia than I had, and people choosing not go through treatment than I had before cancer. So prior to cancer, my idea was like, oh, euthanasia is terrible. Why would anybody choose not to go through cancer treatment? Like, I don't understand why these people are like, oh, I just give up and die. Well, now that I'm in it and that I have experienced, at times very, very low quality of life and extreme despair, I understand why somebody would say, no, I don't want to go through chemo. Like, no, I would just have a few lives in a few months and die naturally and not have to go through this fight, because it's very exhausting. And you feel like a piece of cattle, it's physically and emotionally draining. It's very hard on your family. So now I have a different perspective. When somebody says that they don't want to go through with treatment, I madly respect them and I deeply empathize, and I have a totally different outlook. And I did a big paper on my final project on kind of just like euthanasia and how, like in Oregon, they basically allow you to have assisted suicide.
Right.
You have to write a few letters. If you're in, now, of course, you have to be in chronic pain, or acute pain. The doctor has to write a letter. You have to write a few different letters. Like there's several things that you can go through. You have to have like a medical reason. You can't just be like, oh, I'm da-da-da-da-da.
All done.
Okay, right. Because someone's in a lot of pain, they can go through this process and basically get assisted suicide. They have to give it to themselves. Now, we're really caring. Most people are really caring about that. Like, oh, if they're in all that pain, like we should be able to like allow them to be put out of their like misery, right? Like nobody should suffer is our idea.
Right.
Okay. But if someone is in emotional pain and they're suffering, how is that different than suffering in physical pain? And I'm not saying I know the answer, because my instinct, I would be like, well, no, it's not the same. But I'm like, well, why don't I think that's the same?
Well, it's not the same, but the emotional pain can cause the physical. Like, I think a lot of my physical disabilities, like diabetes, the brain tumor, stuff like that, is all emotional based. Like, I think that's the toxic thing that has plagued me my whole life. And it's just manifested in my body. I've held all that trauma and that weight, and that's how it came out. The problem, and I've struggled with this, and I understand your questions, like, what's the difference in that pain? Well, I think in my 20s, it was It's too soon. I think, if you're young, even in your 30s, 40s, like I have a reason to walk towards at the time I did, which is changing, unfortunately. But well, it is because I'm so fucking tired, like of fighting this fight, and I'm so tired of it, of bouncing back to being okay, and then not being okay. I'm just fucking tired. I can't even. So tired. Um, but it's changing in the fact that, well, when things do become more beautiful and more hard or more difficult, that beauty tends to outweigh that difficult, unfortunately. I keep saying unfortunately because I don't want, I really, in the depths of, well, yeah, I'm struggling with this. In the depths of my soul, I want to have a life. I want to live. I want to enjoy. I want to have intimacy. But the reality is that I'll probably never have intimacy again because, well, I'm 53 and broke. I had brain tumor and diabetes, and I'm a medical nightmare. So that's probably not going to happen. But there's other aspects of life that are so beautiful that are coming to light for me that I'm really trying to fight because I don't want that beauty to happen in my life in certain ways because I have insured my path in other ways that unless a miracle happens, I can't get out of this. Like I'm pretty much done. So, and I'm okay with that. God, I don't know where I was going with this. Tell me what we were talking about again.
We were talking about the difference between like someone suffering emotionally and someone suffering physically, and why we're
Yeah,
okay with
yeah,
assisted suicide in a physical, like clinical aspect. But if
right,
someone
and
emotionally, we're like, oh, you just need to deal with it.
yeah, and that's a good point because the problem is like right now I'm struggling with helping a friend. The opportunity for her to get help is very limited. Um, and we're not putting a lot of emphasis on helping those people that don't have insurance, that don't have a job, that these people that can't get out of bed, that can't do this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
they can't get out of bed, they can't get a job, they can't keep a job because of that mental detriment. I I'm on the fence as far as like if we give that opportunity to young people, they're going to take it,
Mm-hmm.
to take their own life, to euthanize, to do it the easy way. I fought a really, really hard war for, since I was at least 5 years old, since my first memory. I I don't know when appropriate is. I know, and looking at my life and the physical pain, the mental pain, and the suffering, and the logic says that, well, again, we go back to the logic. The logic says take your life. The spiritual has shown up differently. My son wasn't talking to me after I'd already put all this in motion. A podcast develops, and then my son calls me, and these events spiritually are turning the tides for the logical choice that I made. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. I'm not convinced on suicide in any realm at this point. Um, Other than looking at my elderly father, who he was independent. He worked all his life. He was strong. He was a boxer. He was powerful. He was formidable. He was all these things. And then at the end of his life, he's getting his ass wiped by some nurse that he can't remember her name, and his dignity's gone. And like, I think, and they took everything because he was old and now he's got to be taken care of and this quality of life is gone. I think it's like he should have been like one of his statements was, "Hey, Britt, can you take me out to the woods and just put a bullet in the back of my head?" I'm like, if I could legally, Dad, I would, because I love you that much. It would be terrible. It'd be horrible, but I know the suffering that you're going to see and that you're going to face,
Mm-hmm.
and how that's going to destroy your dignity and your attitude, your beautiful kindness that, and
Mm-hmm.
this beautiful person that you've always been, and now it's going to be taken away from you. Yeah, I think that's a great situation for him to say, I just want to go to sleep.
Yeah.
I don't know in any other situation, even my own. But they offer that.
My.
Yeah, even in Switzerland though, they offer, you don't have to have terminal illness. I think it's pretty much decision, like if you just decide, but it costs you a pretty penny.
Isn't
That's
that
the
funny?
thing. Yeah, it does, but it's understandable. I mean, it's not terrible. It's like $12,000, but they take care of the cremation. They take care of, like, they give you the pill, blah blah blah. So you can either choose to do it by yourself, or, I mean, which way they would prefer you don't go
It'd be
litter
interesting
your.
side rates, or, just I guess the amount of people that, like, if you took the amount of people that choose that and looked at that against our rates of suicide, if the decision was there for you, would less people take it if it was something like that? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Versus kind of this hidden way where there's, I just wonder,
I
because
think.
sometimes when we're presented with an
Yeah.
opportunity, we don't want it anymore.
Well, and that's the thing. And statistically, I think the more you give a taboo opportunity to people, the less they engage in it. So, like, and I think maybe it's Norway or somewhere in one of those European countries. They've taken murderers and rapists and stuff like that, and not, instead of incarcerating them, they introduce them into, like, they put them in a home, like a house. They all live together. They all have to function together. They have knives in the kitchen. They could kill each other if they want. But what they've done is allowed them to introduce them into life. But they've also done this with drug addicts. Like, you can do drugs. All drugs are legal. We'll even have clinics. You can come. You can sit here, and we'll have a nurse. You can get high as you want, but we'll have somebody, if you go into cardiac, will rescue you, will save you. But you'll be right here. They've opened the door for this, and actually the drug population, the crime has gone down. So once
Wow.
you open those taboo doors and people walk through them, they realize that that's not necessarily where they want to be and what they want to do and how they want to live their life. It's really interesting. It's the same thing. Like, the war on drugs has been pointless for the United States. It has done nothing. It's spent billions of dollars on nothing. And that's, on this war on drugs. And then we look at a country that opens up all drugs, crack, meth, coke, all of it, and heroin, and their population, their drug addiction actually decreases.
So
It's
interesting.
incredible. Yeah.
The human mind is a fascinating playground.
Well, it is a very fascinating playground. And we're so hell-bent on saving people instead of walking beside people. I mean, it's the counterintuitive. Anytime, and that's what I loved about Christ. He's always functioning in the counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
If like, suffering brings joy, are you kidding me?
What kind of topsy turvy world are we in? But what did we just talk about? I mean, that's essentially what we talked about. Like,
Yeah,
how these really dark places bring us to these really beautiful
yeah,
spaces.
and when you turn the light on in that darkness, you'll see everything that's beautiful, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I was kind of telling my friend the other day. I was like, I've entered into this darkness with people, and I hate to say it, but I feel like I'm kind of a light in a dark, very, very dark place. And I don't want to feel that. I don't want to, because I feel like that brings ego into my life, but maybe it
I
doesn't.
don't
I
think
haven't,
it does. You didn't choose this.
yeah. And I haven't really unpacked that.
I think it's going to be really interesting, like the next few months, to hear more of your story and what this looks like because you essentially planned your death. And in doing that, it gave you the courage to live out your true purpose. And I think that's beginning to take form and that's beginning to shape. And even though I hear like a hesitancy in your voice to face it, it's like it's either face this or die. Like,
Right. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, that takes a lot of courage. And I think you're going to discover so many amazing things about yourself that I hope that you learn to truly love. But I think that you're also going to see that that is also going to be very giving to other people.
I mean, I hope so. I mean, that
Don't, I mean, it will be like when we're walking
yeah.
out in our true purpose, not anybody else's, it's a gift. Like when you think of people that are really passionate or that love what they do, or when you have met somebody that
Right.
has walked
Yeah.
purpose, you walk away from that situation changed.
Yep.
Even if it's something like skiing, like I'm not interested in skiing, but I know that if I met somebody who was walking in their true purpose of like a full-time skier or something like that, I would probably leave like changed because
Yeah.
that passion would translate somehow into my life and into my life's purpose, you know?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I read a book. It was called Born to Run.
Love. Oh my gosh.
I'm
If
not
you
a
didn't get
runner.
started
I
after
don't
watching
give
that
two
book,
shits about running. But I love that book.
that
Love
was
that
an
book.
incredible book. One of my,
Yeah.
definitely in my top 5 books of all
Really?
time.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%.
That's awesome.
I mean, just an incredible book on perseverance,
Yeah.
the human, like what we're capable of. And I think that's what happens is like when you meet somebody walking in their true purpose, it makes you realize what we are capable of. What
It's
we are capable
incredible.
of. Yeah.
Yeah. Unbelievable. What we can accomplish if we just change our mindset. If we
Yeah.
just believe in ourselves enough to move into that space.
And we're willing to take a risk
Yeah.
because that's the thing that someone told me, because there are some things that grew out of my diagnosis that I feel like might be part of my purpose, but I don't want anything to do with because I never like wanted those things. And I'm not very good at them.
Mm,
and and so it's like, well, I don't want to do that because I'm not going to be very good, or you know, in me trying, like it's going to come out messy or not great. And it's like you don't get the glory without going through the shit,
right.
and you understand that there's no avoiding making shit for a while until it's refined and then becomes beautiful. Like very few people come out just making beautiful things, right? There's
Right.
usually
Yeah.
like a struggle that we all don't see, but we receive the highlight reel of like, oh, they must have always been good at that. I'm getting my 200 hour. I just finished getting my 200-hour certification in yoga. And I made the mistake of like getting on Instagram the night before and like looking up all these amazing like spiritual yogis like that lead all these retreats and do all these amazing poses. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm such an imposter. Like, what am I doing? Like, da, da, da. I was like, wait a second. No one's seeing the struggle that they went through before, like learning how to do their
Right.
first downward dog or their first forward fold or messing an entire sequence in class, and having everybody go in the wrong direction. Like, I'm sure those things happen, but we just don't see those. And it's like, if we can have the humility to give ourselves grace to approach our craft not perfectly and continue to go at it because we know that's our purpose, eventually it's going to be refined and we're going to be able to, it's beautiful even in the imperfections. And I think that's what we have to realize, like even as we're in on the early stages of things, that it's still life-giving because it's our purpose, not because it's perfect or not because it's good. Like it doesn't matter who it reaches. What matters is
Yeah.
that we're expressing our true purpose as a gift to our creator, right? Like
Yeah.
essentially an outpouring.
So there's this book. It's called The War of Art.
Love
And
that book
yeah,
by
it's
Stephen
great.
Pressfield.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Great book. And
Yes.
it basically is just saying the premise of it. Great book. I think you should read it over and over and over.
Yes. Yes. I probably am due for another read. So I'm glad you said that. I will read it this
Yeah.
week.
And the premise is just do the work. Just show up and do
Yeah.
the art.
Yeah.
Don't
He
do
said,
it for anybody.
yeah. He's like, well, my inspiration strikes every morning at 9 a.m.
Yeah.
And he's like, of course, it doesn't strike every morning at 9 a.m. But what he's
Right.
saying is he's going up.
Yeah.
He's going to go up.
You show up,
regardless.
you do the work, and you don't worry about the outcome. And
Yes.
because when it comes to art, you're creating something visual, but it should be something visual for yourself first.
Yes.
If you can sell it, if you can bring it into somebody's life, if you can put joy into somebody else's life because of it, then that is the bonus round. You're entering into the bonus round always.
Yeah.
Like the moment you get to share that, the moment I'll say that again, the moment you get to share that with somebody, you enter into the bonus round. And
I love
but
that.
you never do it for the bonus round. You do it because you do it for yourself. Like I show up on this thing because not for the outcome. It's if it reaches one person, that's that's the beautiful part. That's the bonus round.
Yeah. You have to fall in love with like the process. And if you
Yes.
don't love the process,
Yep.
then there's really no point.
Yep.
Like you have to find a way to love it. And Rick Rubin, he had a beautiful quote very similar to exactly what you're saying, where basically he said, the most important thing you can do for your audience is not consider your audience
Right.
in terms of creating art. Because the second you start
Yes.
considering them,
Yes.
you start changing it to, again, like we said, try to please everybody instead of
Yep.
dusting off our feet and being like, what I'm going to make isn't for everybody. And I'm totally okay with it. What's more important is that you're being true to your purpose. And the second you start considering it, it starts to taint your
Right.
purpose. And that really resonated with me because I thought, oh, there's some things, that I feel like I want to create. And I'm like, well, what do people want? And then when I heard that, I was like, oh, I'm asking the wrong question. The question I need to be asking myself is, what was I made to create? Not what do people want?
Wow. Yes.
The wrong
Yes.
question.
What was I made to create? And
And we're
that's a
all creators.
yep. And we'll go back to this purpose thing real quick. For so long, for so long, I didn't have direction or purpose, or I was always trying to figure it out. And I was always like, well, God's calling me to do this and God's calling me to do that. It's like, no, he's actually not calling you to do anything but be exactly who you are at this moment.
100%.
Yeah.
Like 100%. I wish I could just stick a pin on it and be like, yep, that's it. If we're
Yeah.
gonna profess to have any answers today, I feel like that is the answer. And I will say, Mike and I just had this conversation literally last night. And I was like, why couldn't you get your shit together when we were first married? And he's like, I was waiting on God. He's like, I was waiting and I couldn't understand, Karrah, why you were buzzing around doing 5 million things, like running around like a chicken with your head cut off. And I thought, doesn't she know to just be still and just wait on God? Like, God's going to tell me
Yeah.
what to do. And I'm like, and he's like, I wish I could have gone back and stopped myself from believing it because it crippled me to like make this thing that God wanted me to do so deep and so specific when really I didn't understand that it didn't matter what I did. Like, as
Right.
long as I was here for the moment,
Yep.
God is happening in interactions and happening all like nothing is separated from him. Everything is spiritual. So
Yep.
as long as I was just going to surrender to the moment, it wouldn't matter if I was a trash man or making guitars or going to school
Right.
to teach English. Like
Right.
that was all part of God's plan if I would have just picked one. And
Yep.
so we can cripple ourselves by getting caught in that rut of like, well, what's my purpose? What's my plan? You can make it too technical. Like just go
Yep.
out there and do.
Yep.
Or, like I love, how you said like you basically, planned your death and then basically was like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Like what would your heart's desire be?
Yeah.
If you
Like
didn't have any
as I walk towards it, what would I want to do? What would I want to be? I've been talking to my son about this. Like I have all these issues and these problems and these traumas and this, you name it, and fail. The moment I can step back from all my emotion and everything and say, and look at everything logically, like the whole point of God or Christ, God, my faith is that God accepts you for who you are right now. So once I accept myself for who I am, then I can step back and say, well, I'm a drug addict, I'm alcoholic, I'm a suicidal, I've been molested, and I'm like, and I've done all these things, and I'm like, I step back and I'm like, okay, well, I don't really like that I'm a drug addict. I accept that I'm a drug addict, but I don't really like it. So what am I going to do to start moving forward? Start moving in a direction that gets those drugs out of my life. What am I going to do to start moving in a direction that porn is no longer attractive to me? Because I don't like these attributes about myself. So now that I've accepted myself, I can start moving to bettering myself. We don't look at it that way. It's always like, well, how do I fix the problem right now? You can't. You just have to start moving towards something. Start moving towards, started moving towards that and started, well, I'm done with my life. And well, now I have the opportunity to reinvent that and do something different about what I don't like about myself. It's a weird transition. And I've said this to a few people, once I accepted myself, things started peeling away that I didn't like about myself.
Wow. Takes a
Yeah.
lot of,
So,
I mean, you just have so much courage to face these things that so much of us avoid. And I don't know why we avoid them. And there's so much shame and darkness. And I think that's why I'm such a big proponent of transparency and why I've been so honest
yeah,
about some things is I'm like, there, shame can't, when you expose the light, the shame can't be there. And the more we
right,
hide those inside of ourselves, the more we beat them over. And then when we expose them and we actually see them, it's like the monster under the bed. We look underneath the bed and we're like, oh, there actually is no monster.
right,
We see those things inside of ourselves and we're like, okay, this isn't who I am. This is a part of me, or this is something that I'm feeling, or this is something that I'm thinking, or something that I'm experiencing. But this does not define who I am.
right. Yep. And it's just like those things I was saying earlier. It's like I look at people, I'm like, well, you can't get out of the darkness. Why don't you just kill yourself? It's like, no, that's not. But as soon as I vocalize that, then I can say, no, that's not good thinking.
Mm-hmm. You have
But
to get
me,
them out in the open
yes, as
to
soon
kind
as
of
I
break them
expose that,
down.
yeah,
Yeah.
those negative, terrible thoughts that we have. I've thought about killing people. I've thought about, I've thought about rape. I've thought about murder. I've thought about all these taboo things. And once I speak them out in my own life or
Mm-hmm.
to my faith, um, I'm able to say, well, that's actually really stupid. I know you had that thought. It's not a good thought. And now let's see why you're having that thought. I can
Right. Where
start
is it coming?
picking apart. Yeah. I can
Right.
actually start breaking down the things that are so taboo to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And once I bring that to light, I'm able to, well, that's the path. I mean, it's like the more I bring this to light, the less hold it has on my life. And I'm like, well, I'm like, well, you've kind of ensured your path, so you kind of need to hold on to it.
Right.
but there's this power that's working beyond my strength to bring life to me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And as much as I want what I want, something greater is working inside me to bring life to the dark path that I'm on, basically.
Uh,
Yeah, it's incredible. I'm not used to it, but it's also because I'm just, well, I, when we go to do the work, you just show up to do the work. You don't try to control the outcome of what you want that work to do. It's like this
mm-hmm.
podcast. If it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't matter. My voice is on. It's been recorded. My story's been recorded. My gift has been recorded, and there's nothing that can take that away.
Mm-hmm.
And that is there for, no matter the outcome or the result, that is there for everybody that wants to listen. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a weird thing. It's like, I didn't do it because I want people to listen. I did it because I needed to just do the art. I just needed to do the work so I can create something better inside myself, so I can help other people, or individually, on an individual basis, be something more, and to show them that they can be more. I don't know.
Wow.
It's a weird dynamic because I wouldn't generally, I've got a couple things coming out soon, podcast wise, that are just me, where it's like a full exposure of, I think I called it the Pants Around My Ankles series, and now it's like a look inside the suicidal mind, and that's where I'm kind of at. And it's like, these are some dark things that I've got to expose to people so that they know that it's okay to feel this. And
Yeah,
that's
that
a
you're
really hard,
not
yeah,
the only one.
yeah.
And it's really sad because I've had some friends that have had people close to them that have committed suicide
Hmm.
in the past couple years, and it might just be the community that I'm in, but it seems like over the past couple years, I'm hearing about it more than I've heard
Hmm.
about it in my entire life.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's like coming out of COVID or what the situation is, but I think it matters more now than ever that we have those conversations and that we know how we can show up for people that are having those feelings, because I think the
Yeah.
scary part is we don't know how to show up for people, and how do we create the space where that person can feel safe enough to share that they're feeling this way,
Yeah.
so that
And
we,
yeah.
because I know that any of those people affected by these situations, in a heartbeat, if they knew that they were feeling anything, they would have been there to listen, and it's not their fault, of course, but how can we provide that space for people,
Well,
to potentially avoid something like this? How do we look for the signs? Like, what are the signs? What are the signs? Like, I have one friend
the,
where I'm like, oh my gosh, do I just need to ask? Like, are you in danger of killing yourself? And if so, how can I show up for you? Like,
well,
what do I
that's the
say?
thing. Yes. See, we're so afraid that if we mention anything about mental health or suicide, that we're going to push somebody over the edge. That person is already on the edge and they're ready to push themselves over.
Mhm.
Sometimes providing that little thread of hope, that little, like somebody cared enough, noticed me enough to say, "Hey, are you okay?" That's a huge thing. It's the same thing with a friend of mine. All I did one night was recognize that, just felt that micro vibration in the earth, and in that moment, to say, "Are you okay? Do you want to talk?" Well, 2 years later, she comes to me and she says, "You saved my life that night." I'm
Oh
like,
my,
"What the fuck?" Yeah, and it's like, and all I've ever done since that moment is check on her to say, "Are you doing okay? Do you need to talk? You're loved." Period. Every couple of weeks. That's it. That's it. That's all
wow.
I do. Do we spend a lot of
Like,
time together? No.
present though. You had to be present enough in that
Hmm.
moment
Yeah.
to feel what she was expressing energetically.
Yeah.
Like, if you wouldn't have been present, you probably would have missed that moment.
Yeah. And, I've spent a lot of time navel gazing, but through that, it's allowed, because of maybe the way I think, it's allowed me to become empathetic and compassionate, and understand that I'm not the only one that's suffering, but somebody else is suffering in the
Mm-hmm.
same manner that I am suffering, and realizing that my story is not unique, that everybody's story is unique, and everybody has issues. And that I would bet, my guess is that 90% of the people on this planet have thought about taking their life in some
Oh yeah.
form or fashion. And and it's the most stigmatized subject and most taboo subject, even beyond abortion or some of these other things that we can run down roads on. Suicide's permanent. Well, so is abortion, for that matter. Um, but we don't talk about the mother, that, and her story, and what she had to go through, and what she's going through now, that she's taken action to take a life, potential life, or whatever. I don't know anything about that very much, but it's a taboo subject that people are very disagree on very heavily. And it's like, well, no, why don't we just embrace the people that are involved in it? And if we walk alongside those people that suffer in those decisions and those hardships, maybe we can, maybe instead of chastising and ridiculing, maybe why don't you just walk beside? And if they decide to do that, then that's their choice, but you still walk beside them. And if
Mm.
they decide not to, then maybe you had influence on that created life, but they still have all these other. I'm sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole that I could probably go down for a while. But it goes along the same lines of decision making and taboo and all that other good stuff. But anyway, I don't know where I was going with that one either. You think you have
Well,
brain
this kind
fog
of
from?
no, yeah, you were just talking about, I mean, what can we do when we feel like we have somebody that is considering that, or how do we look for those signs, or what are ways that we can show up? And it sounds like it's a lot easier than we think.
It is. It's just a matter of caring. We don't have to fix everybody. We don't have to fix anybody. We just care. Just
Mm-hmm.
love. And
And
I think
a lot of pressure off, by you saying like, oh, that's somebody's choice regardless, but you're going to be next to them, you
mhm,
know, that it's not your job to talk them out of it. It's your
right.
job to walk next to them, but not try to talk them
Yeah.
out of it. I mean, of course you want to, and that's
Yes.
fine.
Yes.
And do talk. I mean, I would say, right? Like, do try to talk someone out of it, but know that it is not your responsibility, right? Like, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
their choice is not your responsibility to change.
Yes. And that's where people find themselves carrying weight that's not necessary. It's not my job to change you. It is my heart that would not be the case.
Right.
Like if I walk beside somebody, my heart is that you don't kill yourself. My heart is that you find help, and that I'm always going to try to talk with you and talk you through that, so that you don't take your life, not necessarily talk you out of it, but talk you through the process of how you're feeling right now. So that's not the decision today,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll revisit that decision tomorrow, and we'll do it again tomorrow if that's what we got to
Right.
do. But as long as you're breathing, there's hope. As long as you're, and a friend of mine was like, nobody living knows how sad somebody has to be to take their life. Nobody living knows how sad it is to want to,
Wow.
well, to take your life.
I had to think about that for a second.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's a deep statement, deep
yeah,
thought. It's like,
it,
even
wow.
I don't know how
Right.
bad,
Because you
because I
haven't.
haven't done it.
Right.
I
So
haven't done it.
technically, I mean, they're correct.
Yeah.
None of us do.
Yeah. I don't
Wow.
even know, because I have to crest the threshold of taking my life to
Right.
understand that. And then what's on the other side? Well, we don't know, but um, nobody knows how bad it has to be for somebody to do the permanent thing of taking their life. It's an incredible statement.
Yeah.
Um, well, we're about 2:30 in. Do you have any things that you would like to say in closing, encourage people, anything else you want to share with us
Well,
about
I
your
think
story? There's
that
so much. I think we could go for a couple more hours here. Maybe we'll do another segment, because I think your positivity, your strength, your fortitude, your formidability to fight in a war that is so difficult to fight mentally, not just physically, is inspiring, and I love that. And I don't just want this podcast to be about suicide. It's about what people's stories are that they go through in suffering, and how they come out on the other side. And I think you have a mindset that has made you an incredible warrior, in so
thank you.
many ways, and has also made your husband an incredible warrior in so many ways. And um, the people around you, and your sisters and your family and everybody that supported you through this, and you maybe have an advantage over some people because you have that beautiful community.
I do.
Um,
I would say I have a very big advantage due to my community.
yeah,
And I think a community like that is built by, you have to have the courage to speak up and to be transparent and to know that not everybody is going to receive you. But those
mm,
that do, you have to allow them to show up for you, and you have to be honest, and you have to like humble yourself and expose those places that they can show up. And that is how community is built. But if you're not willing to go there yourself, right, to those dark places that we've talked about, and to identify where you're hurting, how can people show up for you if you won't even show up for yourself? And so I
right.
think that's the key, is having the courage to face those parts of you that are hurting, and to sit in those emotions and to also understand that, your community is not the ones that are going to heal you. Only you are going to heal you, but you do need the help and support of
Yes.
your community to dig deep, right?
Yeah.
Like my community and my friends have helped me dig deep, and they have pointed and been like, remember where the strength lies, like pointed, which is always inside myself.
Right.
And, even my husband can't be that. I have to be that for myself, and we all have to be that for ourselves. And we have to find the strength inside of ourselves to keep going. And we have to have the faith that it's there. It's there. You have to dig deep. And if you can't dig deep, you've got to grab somebody and say, help me dig deep. How can I
Yeah.
dig deep and find this?
Yeah.
Because it is there. And I thought about this. If somebody were to ask me, like, Karrah, would you want to know what you were going through? Like what was ahead of you, right? When you got diagnosed for the first time, so that you could prepare in some way. And I would say, absolutely not. 0% chance. Because if I would have known when I was 29, what I was going to face, I would have been like, I don't have the strength. There's no way I can get through that. Give me the easy button. I'm done. And that's partially true because no, I didn't have the strength at 29. And with each challenge we meet, we find new strength inside of ourselves that we're able to build upon, almost like a staircase, right? And it brings us up and brings us up. And so that 29-year-old, no, wouldn't have been able to because she didn't have the experience that I've had now, with 3 diagnoses to face what I'm facing, like in my marriage, in my health, like, emotionally, spiritually. And so, no, I wouldn't want to know because I am facing it now. But I would have been so scared if I would have known like what was ahead in the past. And so I guess I would just say that like we do have the strength to face these challenges, even when we don't. And to trust that you are like strong enough deep down, that you are a healer, that you are your own self-healing vessel, and to trust that.
Yeah. And when you're tired, when you, and I mentioned this earlier, like me being exhausted, and there's this mental, something happens. Like I thought I was tired before, and I didn't even realize the extent of how exhausted I am physically. But yet I still get up every day, and I still haven't taken my life, and I still haven't made that decision. I still make the decision to keep moving forward and to keep fighting, and to, for some reason, I mean, this podcast is another version of me fighting for life.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to find, when it goes back to that purpose, when you find that purpose and you realize your community, and you realize you're not alone, and you realize that people love you, and that like there's strength to be had and to be taken, and to focus on, even when you think you don't have it. It's amazing. Um, anything else that you want to spit out there? I know we could keep going. I know we can.
No, just if you don't know what your purpose is, I think, you should find your purpose for today. If it's too overwhelming to find your purpose, as because that feels very overwhelming to me
That's a
because
good
I
point.
don't know what my life is going to look like. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find health. I don't know if I'm going to be doing this forever. Or for just a short amount of time, like my cancer could come back tomorrow. And so I have to think about my purpose of like, what is my purpose today?
Yeah.
And the only way to find my purpose today is to be here now in the present.
Yeah.
And so I would just encourage people like, just find your purpose today in the moment that you're in.
Yeah. And there's something about, a couple things to touch on and we touched on, and this is, I think, important, learning how to sit in your pain,
Mm-hmm.
and not just relishing in your pain, not just being in that pain. And I don't know
Yeah, like
how.
not creating a story about your pain for
Right.
yourself and
Right.
instead feeling it because
Yeah.
those are two different things.
Yes. Yeah. Sitting in that pain, embracing it, and working through why you're in that pain, instead of just sitting in that pain. And I don't know how else to explain. I can't. There's a difference in embracing it and stewing in it. There
Yeah.
we go. Yes. Quit stewing in your pain. start working through the process of why you feel your pain. And if you know why you feel your pain, then you can figure out how to resolve that pain. That's the thing. If you can recognize a problem, you can solve a problem. If you don't recognize a problem, you can't solve the problem. So sitting with it will allow you to recognize that.
Yeah.
I guess in a lot of ways. I never did that until probably this year. And ironically, I've experienced more pain this year than I've really have in most of my life.
But you've probably experienced more joy than you ever have.
Not yet.
Well, it's coming, I promise.
Yeah, it will. Not yet, but I sit in it daily because I know the outcome. This is not where it's the permanence of it. This is not permanent.
Right.
So it's easier for me to sit in it now and embrace it and still function in it, if that makes sense. But anyway, thank you for doing this. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story, your heart, your soul, exposing yourself in ways that is not comfortable for the outside world, for us to do as emotional people. And I really do appreciate you and your family and your strength and everything you've gone through. This has been a pleasure. I've looked forward to this conversation. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but I do appreciate everything that you've brought to the table today, especially your wisdom and your kindness and love and joy for people. Thank you so much.
Talking to you and hearing your story, and I can't wait to see where it goes. It's very exciting.
Yeah. Tell your husband I appreciate everything. So
I will.
Thanks for being here. Well, thanks for joining the Suicide Monk on this adventure and this journey that has to be unfolded. So, yeah.
Cool.
Thanks a bunch.
You're welcome.
Oh, did you want to plug your podcast? Not your podcast, but your friend's podcast that you interviewed on?
Oh yeah, I
that
recently.
would be nice. He's in the mental health.
Yeah, he's amazing. He has a crazy story also of like overcoming extreme tragedy and like a near death accident that brought him to be basically like a mindfulness coach and guru. So if you're new to mindfulness and meditating, he has an amazing app that he just started this new thing where basically pay whatever you can. For all of his merchandise and his app. So yeah, it's really amazing and such an incredible step of faith. So it's an app where if you have anywhere from 1 minute or 20 minutes, you can basically click for a guided meditation, and kind of it's going to allow you to practice being present and kind of getting into that meditative space. So some of them are
amazing.
guided. Yeah, my favorite one is he has one called Stop Shitting on Yourself. And basically it's about releasing all the shoulds in your life and how you should be doing this or you should be doing that, and just allowing yourself to be, and really
that's
this
good.
of radical acceptance. So yeah, if you haven't checked it out, it's called Pause, Breathe, Reflect is the app. And
pause, breathe,
Pause, Breathe, Reflect.
Okay.
Yep. And he graciously had me on one of his podcasts like last week. And so you'll find it there. It's on Spotify under Kintsugi. So the Kintsugi podcast is what he puts out, and it's all about different stories of just amazing humans, of perseverance, and it's really cool.
Can you spell that? Kintsugi?
Yes, let me look that up just to make sure.
I think that would be difficult for some people
Japanese. Yeah. It is, let me just look it up really quick, make sure I have the right one.
Do you still see video on your side?
I do, yes.
Okay.
So it's KINGSUGI.
Okay. So Kintsugi, and that's the name of the podcast.
That's the name of the podcast, yeah.
And is he on there? He's not anonymous, right? What's his name?
No, yeah. His name is Michael O'Brien.
Okay, Michael O'Brien from the Kintsugi podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to, I don't care if people plug me but people looking for mental health, always happy to, give shout out to people that are doing it and they're actively involved in it. And I did see your interview or listen to your interview. It was fantastic. So if you want to hear more about Karrah's story, just go over to the Kintsugi podcast, and she did what was an hour and a half long, something like that.
Yeah, I think it was something like that. Yeah.
somewhere in there. So it's another. We've touched on her story in a different way on this um, today's podcast. So I don't know how else to say that, but yeah. So anything else, Karrah?
No, thanks, Britton. It was a pleasure talking to you and sharing about the challenges of life.
Yeah, I appreciate this so much. Thank you for being here. And that's it for today. So we will see you on the flip side.
Sounds
Peace
good.
out.
All right, thanks, Britton.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.